Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you for joining us. So we're going into spirituality and tarot. Simon Kenny will be here momentarily. We are going to have a great show. This guy's got a nice high and tight beard, everyone. High and tight beard. And that's a good sign for what we're doing this winter. All right. Courtney Marcassani will be in for the UFO report. We got a huge night on UFOs tonight as well. But first, always first. You guys always come first. We have to say hello to all of you. Race fan in the gold medal position. And B with a silver lower lobs taking home a bronze medal tonight. Excuse me for my voice. Robert Lamoth, attorney at large, Michael Morris and Lightwalkers. How you doing? Y2K, 2MI, long time, no time. I would love to go to the Michigan Paracon. Would love to. Jimmy Gonzalez, Jessica S., Roy Boy, Road Flare, Brown Dwarf, Kurt M. Nice to see you all. Lulu Bell, thank you for coming on in. Karen in the Woo Train, how you doing? Paul Damon is here. Paul Damon will be signing autographs after the show. Line up to the left of the studio, if you don't mind, to the left of the studio. Dino Bravo, Dogface Simon, Kevin, D. Cohen, D. Henderson. How y'all doing? Gong Show and Sweet Amy C. How you doing, guys? Thank you for coming on in. Aaron Bacca is here. Aaron will be signing autographs after the show as well. Line up to the right of the studio, if you don't mind, to the right of the studio. Millennium, my man, D. Cypher, Rat Sass, and our good friend, Ozzy Ange. How are you all? The gorgeous Pixie Lara, there she is. Nicole Perron, nice to have you back. As we continue on with roll call tonight, Welsh Hammer, Sarah Yon, Doug Shelby is here. The Doug Shelby has arrived, which means we can officially start this show. And where else are we? Sweet Timmy, where's your goatee, man? Get it into the YouTube chat. All right, All Signs Tarot with Joanne. Welcome back to the show as we continue on with our roll call tonight. Where are we here? Scrolling on down, there's Jennifer Patterson. Yep, she's applying her makeup right now. I don't know why I said that, but it just felt right. Okay, continuing on. And Knight Rider, DB Nobody, what's happening? Buckethead, my man, what's rocking out with you? Blue Cruise, you're nice and early tonight. Amanda Joe Chapman, welcome to SOR Chat. Thank you for joining us. There's Tim Mothman and Tim Mothman's goatee. Two separate entities. Mike Arrington, how you doing? As we continue on with our roll call, we're actually caught up right now. Want to remind you the super chat is open. Why? Well, it's a good way to support what we do on this show on a nightly basis. Super Knower, how you doing? You can also shop at our Spaced Out Radio store on our website. We do not have ugly swag, people. No ugly swag. We got good stuff there. So make sure you check it on out. And if you haven't already, get your time off of work for May 10th through 12th, 2024, the third annual SOR Fan Party, Reno, Nevada, at the Silver Legacy Casino and Resort. Rooms are cheap right now. Now's the time to book them. So make sure you head on over and join us. We're going to have a bunch of fun stars that you see on this show hanging out with you. We got a VIP party, swag bags, live radio show, a ghost hunt, night watch for UFOs. We got it all planned out. Ask people who've been there before, like Tim Mothman. He'll tell you it is worth it. It is a great party weekend, and we want you there. Find out more at spacedoutradio.com and info@spacedoutradio.com. Tickets are $100. All right, let's get the radio side going. Hello to everybody listening in on our radio and what the hell is that called? The podcast side. That's the one. All right. Dave Scott here. Simon Kenny is going to be our guest here momentarily, talking tarot and everything. We are doing the roll call. There is Bill WD-40 lubing us up for tonight's show. Thank you, beautiful Bill. Lavira, how are you? W. David Page and Rat Sass, thank you for kicking off the super chat tonight. Very much appreciate it. And we're going to get going here in just a few seconds. All right. I need something from all of you. Get your horns up. Let's rock. From the mountains of central British Columbia to you listening around the world, this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. We welcome you to tonight's show on our terrestrial affiliates around North America, digitally on Odyssey Radio, TalkStream Live, and KPNL. All of our archives are free. Join us at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on Patreon at the SOR Space Travelers Club. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. Tonight's show is brought to you by Chive Charities. Help make the world 10% happier by visiting Chive Charities today. You can find them on our website. A great show of info tonight. We go down the road of tarot cards and spirituality readings, psychology, philosophy. Simon Kenny is here. He woke up early for us in the UK to join us. You'll like his beard. It's very nice, very high and tight, not like the mess that I'm growing on my face. Then in hour number 3, Steve Stockton from Among the Missing has a great story for us. Following that up, an extremely important UFO report with Courtney Marcassani. Let's get to it, shall we? Simon Kenny is an author, technologist, and educator whose work combines probing questions with technical thinking. As a writer on the topics of spirituality and beliefs, he brings a keen awareness of philosophy and contemporary politics to his experience of spiritual and religious life. Now a non-believer, it is his life's mission to understand the colorful forms that personal convictions often take. He does this with a grounding in the ceaseless autodidactic study that has become the cornerstone of an examined life. He's based out of Ireland. We're glad to have Simon here. Simon Kenny, welcome to Spaced Out Radio for the first time. How you doing, my friend?
Great. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm sorry for waking you up early for this, but we're glad that you're here and willing to take a little bit of time with us to break down your thoughts on philosophy and everything that kind of goes along with spirituality. Now, you say you're a non-believer. What
Yes.
does that mean?
Well, I mentioned it in that bio in the context of two things: my early upbringing in Christianity, and also to make sure that it's clear that I'm not actually a tarot practitioner. I'm a tarot researcher.
Well, we're going to get into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And okay, so the idea that you have had a change of thinking in your own personal life and your own shift. I think a lot of us who are in this field have had their own shift of, maybe coming from a Christian background or a Catholic background. And all of a sudden, things just don't make sense because of the experiences that we have or the research that we do personally. What was the big change for you? Where did it shift?
There's really a lot of reasons. It's hard to pin exactly one. I suppose one of the things that I always come back to is that it's really obvious that religion, at least the practices of religion, are completely man-made or human-made. And whenever you find out about comparative religious studies or just encounter other religions and beliefs, I suppose the claims, the sort of jealous claims of the institutional religions that this is the only way, become, hard to square with the honest and convicted belief of others. So are all those millions and billions of people completely deluded, or might there be more to the story? So that's certainly something that I come back to even now, that makes me question, and that was part of my initial challenging thoughts, I suppose.
See, I love it. I love the fact that you are finding yourself through what you are learning. And I think
Mm,
that's absolutely fair. And behind the scenes, I'm not a religious guy. I consider myself spiritual as well, with some convictions of the way things were created, but I don't push my idealisms on anybody because I don't think that's fair. I mean,
agree.
everybody's got to find their own path. But the one thing that I wholly agree with you, and I argue this with one of my best friends who's very Christian, is that it religion, there's a big difference between religion and spiritual belief. Religion, like you said, it's man-made. Every issue that we've had on this planet has been from man-made concept.
Mm,
I think if we didn't have that, it might be a little bit more peaceful around here, you know. But on the flip side, I think more and more people, I look at my children, I look at my friends, they are looking for something, and they are searching for their own personal belief and their own personal uh, dignity, if we can use that word. Would
yeah.
would you attest that you're seeing that more and more as well?
I think what we definitely see is like more of a plurality of beliefs, and a kind of making up of your own way. And like as you mentioned there, the common phrases like your path, and that's I think that's quite common today. And I read an interesting study that called it the unbundling of belief. The idea being that it's a kind of a pick and mix from different traditions. So there's a few different things going on. There's I suppose, the breakdown of the legitimacy of the institutional religion, although they're obviously still extremely popular. So that's relative to what area in the world we're talking about. But then also the need, as you said, for, I guess, answers to deep metaphysical questions, questions of meaning, belonging, of uh, why are we, why do we exist, all of these things. And there's I think people still are interested in their traditions and heritage, especially people who maybe are first or second, third generation immigrants who maybe don't have the same context for their ancestral beliefs. There's a lot of renewed interest in that, as well as the ancestral beliefs of others. I know in America, where you are, that there's of people who come from immigrants from from Europe. There's a big interest in the First Peoples, or the Native Americans, spirituality, and you see that in tarot. There's a few tarot decks that are that use First Peoples sort of mythology and spirituality there. So people are making it up, and that's something that people criticize as well. That it's, well, if you can just make it up as you go along, is there any depth to it? Is that real in any way? But practitioners, I think, don't. There's a comfortableness with that, with a kind of ambivalence and a experimental and exploratory approach that is it's very interesting, and I'd be interested to hear more about your own. Like, do you mix as well from different traditions, or how are you? Would you even
I'm
define yourself as a Sikh?
I'm into mixology. I'll be honest with you. I'm into mixology. I have a couple of tarot decks. Well, one tarot deck and one Oracle shapeshifter cards here that I use. I like the fact that the cards tell a story. I like
Yes,
the fact
absolutely.
that you know there are certain decks I cannot read for the life of me, but there are decks when I can look at the pictures and I can say, okay, this is telling me a story. This is what's feeling. This is what's going on. And I think if you allow yourself to immerse the energy of the deck to get inside of you, it is actually going to tell a great story. You don't need to open up the book and read the meanings of the cards. You don't need to read the little passages at the bottom of the cards because the story tells, the pictures tell the story. At least that's the way I find a good deck. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I have lots and lots and lots of decks. As part of my research, I really explored so many different kinds. There's really a deck you can almost come up with a word, and you'll find a deck to that word. Like, I don't know, the candles tarot deck. You'll probably find one somewhere that has that. There's been a real proliferation of them. But in terms of the interpretation, you're absolutely right. The more and more people are using a more interpretive approach and a more intuitive approach rather than like using the received meanings. I wonder if there's a connection there as well between the received revelations of kind of dogmatic religions, and I think that they are related. The two, the more experimental approach and the more intuitive approach, it's definitely part of that unbundling of spirituality that I mentioned. So people do they do use their own intuition more, and one of the reasons I think that the deck is so popular and there's so many different kinds is that the images are archetypical, and as you said, the different flavors, the different imagery will speak to you or not, depending on your own culture, your own interests, and you mentioned energy, whatever that means in some sense, the energy as well, I suppose. And yeah, there's really just so many decks. I think there's something out there for everybody who's interested.
For you, what was really the turning point for you to put you on this subject and to really focus on your research of tarot and the spirituality behind it? What brought you there?
Well, I wanted to understand why reasonable people were interested in this at a time whenever I thought that no reasonable person could be. So I would have been, a kind of boring scientific materialist who kind of thinks that they have all the answers. Whenever I left Christianity, I kind of went into that mode, with interested in people like Christopher Hitchens and that kind of new atheism. But as I read more about philosophy in particular, but also anthropology and looking at the cultures of the world, it just became untenable to me to at least to dismiss people's views and beliefs out of hand in a kind of very easy way that it's cultural and it's psychology can kind of explain why people are weird in all these ways. But actually, the reading philosophy encouraged me to try to take the truth claims of others seriously and to weigh them up, myself, and actually walk through them. So that's what I did with the tarot. It was motivated by trying to understand people that I know who are into it, and yeah, I just read so many books on it and realized that there was not there wasn't a good engagement with it that I could find from a more of a philosophical basis that wasn't written by someone advocating the usage of the cards themselves. That was how most books on tarot are how-to books that kind of give the author's flavor on, what the cards mean, or a kind of a structure for interpretation. And then some books that mention tarot are also more like takedowns that say, maybe it's within a book that's talking about how, spirituality is all nonsense, something like that. So between those two is where I would situate myself. Someone who doesn't truthfully believe in the predictive power of tarot, but that's very interested in the way that it expresses itself in our culture, but that I have tried on the beliefs, or I have tried on the reasoning behind the beliefs, and what I've come to is that it really matters what you think the structure of reality. I mean, maybe it's obvious, but it really matters what you think the structure of reality is, and what that is. We call that metaphysics or ontology. So, paring back, what is modern mysticism in general based on? It's very, very interesting how it's supported in the literature. It would be two things is what I've identified as quantum mechanics, feeding into a kind of quantum mysticism, and then Jungian psychology. Those two things we see in the tarot. So I just really wanted to try to satisfy myself with some explanation, both on why people can believe it, as in what convinces them, and then also just to read deeply about it.
So would you consider yourself a skeptic, somebody who's trying to disprove the idea that there is reality to this because it is mind based, or would you consider yourself pretty agnostic and let the cards say what they say?
Yeah, if I had to choose, it would be more agnostic. I definitely would. I do try to differentiate myself from those kind of skeptics with a capital S, like Michael Shermer and so on, who, um, you know, they're just really interested in trying to dismiss the beliefs of others. So no, that wouldn't be my approach. Although probably if myself and Sherman were to sit down, we'd probably have a lot in common in terms of what our own actual beliefs are. But like you mentioned earlier on, I don't try to convince other people of my beliefs. What I'm interested in is what is the kind of landscape of belief, not to dismiss or to uh, disprove or debunk other people's beliefs. That's not at all like what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is like, what's the history behind the beliefs? How do people come to believe these things? Because I'm not convinced that any of these questions are really answerable. That there's genuine mystery in the world. So I would actually consider myself a skeptic with a small s, the kind of philosophical skeptic, which wonders about whether or not everything is knowable. How do we get knowledge, that we even have knowledge? Because if we admit to the possibility of a kind of a spirit world, which most people have done for all time, then it's very difficult to know anything for sure about that spirit world. And there's many guises that can take, in terms of our own, the contemporary landscape of belief, like whether or not it's the collective unconscious of Jung, like what actually is that, and how might it work? Or if there's some kind of, idealism, which means that our reality, the physical world and so on, is some projection of, a more ideal, more real world. It's very complicated stuff, but if any of that is true, it'll be very difficult to know whether or not it is or isn't. There's many, many ways we can try to argue about it and reason through it, but it certainly wouldn't be my mission is to debunk or so I wouldn't wear the label of skeptic very comfortably, but I do have to say that what I usually self-describe myself as a good faith skeptic, just to make that simpler. But the long version is what you got just there.
Yeah, that's not a problem. I like to say, everything that we do here, whether it's, talking about tarot cards or ghosts or UFO encounters or Bigfoot or whatever it may be, okay, you have to take things with a grain of salt. Just because you hear a branch ruffle in the trees It doesn't mean that Sasquatch is shaking it. It doesn't mean that,
Yeah,
that there's Dogman all of a sudden pissing on the tree kind of thing. Just because your lights flicker doesn't mean that your house is haunted. We have to have a little bit of skepticism instead of, when it comes to these topics, because there are logical, reliable answers that are human. And
absolutely.
and I think, what if I get this correct, is we got about 3 minutes to go here. I think your goal is to say, look, there's something out there. We're trying to find what something's out there, but you just can't believe everything,
Yeah,
because
I
the
would
people who
say that.
believe everything are really looking for their 15 minutes of fame.
What I would say is I agree, and what I would add to that is, there's a reason why things are popular. So try to engage with that. There's like, if people have experiences, just they're happening for some reason. It may not be the reason that they think, but it's worth starting by taking their claims seriously. And so I think it's part of actually a respect for people is to engage, in a good faith manner with the claims that they make, and so on. And yeah, like the rustle in the trees, you can apply critical thinking to that, but it's also interesting, and it's useful to try and engage with, well, why might I think that there's something maybe out there? What is the history of those beliefs? Why would I jump to one or another? So to apply like good self-awareness and critical thinking. So that is actually one of the things I would say is my mission, is to try to promote that kind of thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's healthy. I do. I do believe that is a healthy way of doing things. I mean, so for you, as you try to learn more about these studies that are going on, the studies that you are creating from it, are you what have you learned that maybe caught your attention about, just like, hey man, like, what this is pretty accurate.
Oh, right, yeah, about the tarot readings themselves. There's just several different explanations, and I would. So what I do in my book, A Critical Introduction to Tarot, is to just try to lay that out and let the reader make up their mind. I think that's a really good way to go about it, is to explain and look it through a few different avenues. But to answer your question, it really depends on the nature of reality. So tarot cards are just cards. They're just pieces of cards, paper, basically. They're made these days in a factory somewhere. So you have to ask yourself, like, well, how are these connected to, let's say, a prediction of the future, or even just information about my life? Like, in what way would they be connected there? So, it would be difficult, I think, to justify that they're in some way physically linked. So it has to be then through the person themselves that it may be linked. So one, like the materialist explanation, is that it's a psychological projection, and that's usually the way in for many contemporary writers on the subject today, that they focus on the psychological. But because of the Jungian psychology and the work of Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss early 20th century Swiss psychologist, who was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud, he was really interested in mysticism and alchemy in particular. And he sort of postulated this collective unconscious, which is a way that all of our personal unconscious is. So your private mind, but the part of your mind that you don't have ready access to, that maybe, whenever you would go to sleep at night and dream and you have some fantastical dreams, like, where did that come from? It had to come from me in some sense, but where? Or especially if someone spoke to you in a dream that seemed to have some, information, or, it was compelling in some sense. Jung proposed that we're all connected to each other in some way through this collective unconscious.
Simon, we're going to go to break here at the bottom of the hour here on Spaced Out Radio. When we return, we'll learn more about dreams, collective consciousness, spirituality, tarot cards, and we might get a few questions as well. Spaced Out Radio continues right after this. All right, we got about a 5-minute break here where we literally BS about nothing.
Cool.
Yeah. Ireland, eh?
Actually, I'm in Berlin at the moment.
How are you?
Yeah, so it's is it even earlier?
Oh, you should be later.
Later, yeah, that's right. Well, it's half
What
6 in the
time
morning for
is?
me now.
Yeah, it's 6:30 for you. 9:30 here in British Columbia.
Very good.
Yeah. So that's we are getting ready for the snow.
Looks like we've got a question there.
Yeah, we'll get to that one when we get back on the air.
Sounds good.
Normally I don't take questions this early, but I'll get this one in for Guardian.
Very good. Yeah, it's a common question.
How many decks you got with you right now?
Actually, because I travel light, I only have one deck, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which is the most popular one, or the one that most people would think of. But I have about, I think, 40 decks back home. Yes, I think I've seen that.
Yeah, this is a big deck. You know, I like the bigger decks in life. I've got another deck over here. What's? Ooh, hold on. Who's flying out at me? I haven't read these ones in a long time. Time to act upon your plans. Creativity is rewarded. Luxurious or abundant resources. Ask your angels for helpful people to light your load. Working too many hours. Wow. Maybe this one's for me here. Trying too hard to please others. Bingo. Not 2 cards or 1? It is 2 cards. Ooh. Follow your passion. You are ready for any challenge, opportunities for excitement and adventure. Nice. Your dreams are fulfilled. Hard work leads to great success. A love for beautiful things in life, like a nice beard.
Thank you for the compliments about my own
Oh,
facial
yeah,
hair.
man. Hey, we like a good beard around here. We
I
like
can
a
see
good
that.
beard.
I can see that.
Yeah. I'll get my other deck here. Hold on. These cards I love. Hi, gorgeous Kib Jellin. Are you brushing your teeth right now? She's probably flossing. Probably already brushed, turned her YouTube on her phone, and now she's flossing while she watches. That's my prediction. Let's see how right I am. Yeah, these are my favorite.
Shapeshifters. Okay. Can you pick a couple of cards for me so I can get a feel for it? Like pick out the Fool and what else? Maybe
these ones are very
maybe the Devil or Death. Okay, so they're a bit different.
yeah, these ones
Guardian. That's probably
these are
strength.
Oh yeah. We got about 45 seconds here. So I want to say a big thank you to Rat, Shelly, Joanne, Jennifer, and Guardian for the super chats. Very much appreciate the love and support. No, she hasn't brushed or flossed yet. Simon the Likeable, how you doing?
Very good, thank you.
And let's see here. Who else do we have in our chat room here? Well, we're caught up. Yeah, I got my decks here, man. So I'm ready to pull when you say pull. All right, so we're good. All right, here we go, everybody. Here we go, the second half hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. We very much appreciate hurting your listening ears. Reminder to all of you that if you missed portions of this show or others, you can check out our free archives by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and you can join us on Patreon in the SOR Space Travelers Club. We are dealing with tarot cards tonight from Ireland via Berlin. Simon Kenny is joining us. We very much appreciate you taking the time, Simon, to get up early to do this show. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All right. Normally I save questions for hour number 2, but Guardian here will get his question up. Do tarot decks not work unless received as a gift?
That's a commonly asked question that I've read in the various tarot how-to books that are out there. Any modern writer tends to answer this question that's a myth. But I suppose from my perspective, so that would be the tarot reader's answer. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a tarot reader or practitioner. I'm a researcher. But my question would be on this question is, what does it mean for the deck to work, and why might it not work if it was a gift? Like I was saying earlier on, like applying our own in personal critical thinking and reasoning to this would be, I think, important. So it depends on how you're using it, I suppose. I would suggest. So if you're using it as a psychological reflection tool, then there's no reason to think that it would or wouldn't work any other way, because they're images that you're certainly in the Jungian psychology aspect that we were talking about earlier on, is that they're a way for your subconscious mind to, something for it to bounce off, to bring things from you. If the tarot cards are connected either through your own consciousness or through some aspect of reality to, some other truth, or if they're, guided by angels. I know, Dave, one of your decks there was an angel-based deck. It depends then on what the belief structure that you're working within is. I would say you probably know the answer to that yourself from that, because, what are angels? How do they work? How might they be connected to the cards? It's a real open question. So I would advocate a personal kind of critical approach to that question. But it seems clear to me that those kinds of things in the culture are more like the in the kind of chain letter aspect of kind of urban myths that get passed around, and that it would actually be interesting to trace where this little belief comes from. But I think it's been robustly rejected by any modern tarot reader I have encountered anyway.
Okay, so if we believe what we're seeing and we already have it in us, how does it work if we're reading for other people?
Right. So that's a really good question. Like, many people would have a personal practice with tarot, and that would be more in line with what I was talking about earlier on. most of the modern tarot books are how-to guides for a personal practice rather than to train to be a tarot reader to read for others. But in the descriptions of how to read for other people, especially I think today there's a real like awareness of not imposing your own views on other people, or not trying to, there's a real danger, I suppose, or at least a liability in sort of telling someone, this is going to happen to you, not only because everyone could be wrong about that, even within a tarot belief system. You could be wrong because we're all human, we're all fallible, but also because if they take action on that, you may have done some harm to them. So there's a big awareness of that in the tarot literature. But you're absolutely right. And what tarot readings in practice tend to be, whenever it's someone reading for another person, is a conversation. It's a two-way street. In readings that I've had and readings that I've seen, the tarot reader asks what they often call the querent, the person being read for, to respond to the things that come up. But I suppose one thing that we could say is that usually the tarot reader and the querent will have a common kind of cultural situation, or a common cultural understanding, and the particular deck that's being read from will have common suggestions based on the same cultural knowledge. If we see a lion, like, I could ask you what comes to mind for you. There's a cultural meaning of the symbol of a lion, for example, and what that might mean. But the psychological explanation wouldn't be as valid, I think, as you've rightly pointed out, if it's a reading for another person, because it's not just within the mind of one person.
Okay, so how do we know if a deck, and realistically, they're pieces of paper with art.
Absolutely.
That's what they are. They're pieces of paper with art on them. But how do we know if a deck is evil, if it's enlightening, if it's enchanted, if it's angelic, if it's nurturing? How do we know?
I mean, it's kind of a loaded question in a way, because can a tarot deck be evil? We might go a step behind the question and ask, what are the terms that are meant there? So what would that mean, that for a tarot deck to be evil? I know the popular idea is usually based on either a kind of fear of that may come from prohibition from a religion. For example, modern Christians, certainly in America, are usually very uncomfortable with the tarot deck, even though people may be surprised to hear that it's essentially a Christian cultural practice. Now, it's very arguable that it's a heretical practice, but it's still always been used within a Christian context up until very recently, really. So the tarot come from 15th century Italy, where they were created by aristocratic, devout Catholic Christians, and they contain Christian imagery, but also kind of the allegorical. They were painted at that time. They weren't mass produced or mass printed. They were every deck was bespoke, but they had kind of virtues that would have been associated with correct kind of Christian living, but as well as the rediscovered ideas from especially Greek antiquity in the Renaissance. So that's what the context in which it comes from. But even then, as it was used across Europe, Europe was Christian at the time in the the following centuries, and then in France, whenever it became and it was used as a game, I should say, not as a spiritual practice, certainly not as a spiritual practice, or as as predictive. And it was really only until, or it was really in the 18th century in France, whenever there was like a lot of interest in occult, especially through Jewish Kabbalah, which is a kind of Jewish mysticism, that that we see, or that's the first evidence anyway. Some tarot researchers say that it's likely that it's before that, but that's when we have concrete evidence that tarot began to be used as an esoteric or cult or spiritual practice. And the people that developed that practice were themselves Christian as well in France at the time. So one of the most famous contributors to, actually in general, the Western occult tradition, Eliphas Levi, was trained as a priest and as a Catholic priest. So we have that there again. And if we zoom forward or closer in time to now, in the early 20th century, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck that most people will be familiar with was developed by A.E. Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith, who A.E. Waite was also trained as a Catholic priest, and his practice, although he moved away from institutional religion and was, we could even say, and lots of those people were kind of maybe trailblazers for the kind of unbundling of belief that we discussed earlier on. He very much saw his work in mysticism within a Christian context, and he believed in God in a very Christian sense, but in his own way. So tarot was always, and it was created as a Christian mystical practice. Now at the same time, then Aleister Crowley developed his Thoth tarot deck, and some people have described that as more evil because of the associations with him. He was famously called the Great Beast and was a very problematic figure, certainly, very ethically dubious, and some people think that he was evil, but then there's a lot of people who are interested in his magical practices and so on. So it really depends on what tradition you come from. For Christians may be surprised, as I kind of laid out there, that it comes from a Christian context. So to say that it's evil might be, to maybe more excommunicated or to consider it heretical as opposed to evil. But then it may be on how the deck is used. So it's probably more like that. We might say, if we consider it a tool, it may be, certainly a lot of modern tarot authors would suggest that it's a tool like any other. You can use a brick to build a house, or you can use a brick to hurt somebody with, so that might be one way we could look at it. But probably people have their preconceived notions, and those, I think, are always, something to challenge. That might be one way to think about it.
From that description you just kind of gave me, I couldn't really tell if you were telling the difference between tarot cards and a Ouija board, to be blunt. Right. Is it the same thing then?
I don't actually know a lot about the Ouija board, but I would be able to say that in my upbringing, it was on a prohibited list of sort of items along with the tarot, and it would have been seen as sort of equally dangerous. I suppose for the Christian, certainly the kind of evangelical, Christian in America, which is also the tradition that I come from, even though it's in Ireland, they're seen as connected to, evil spirits and Satan and so on. So how does an Ouija board work? Just through evil spirits. How do tarot reading work? Evil spirits would be the kind of, I think, the typical assumption. So it's just on whether or not you're operating within that belief system. If you are, then I think you can rightly say the tarot is evil, but it's not my belief system, and I don't think that it's everyone's. I do think that for the Christian, that the heritage of tarot, if you look into it in detail, does challenge the notion that it can be. You would have to dismiss a lot of other people as well, or at least say that their practices are evil or at least misguided. But if you're willing to do that, I suppose you could say that.
All right. So getting back to the tarot, that it has so many different outcomes. I had no idea that, going back to the 15th, 16th century, that, preachers were pulling cards on what to do here.
Well, it wasn't that preachers were, it was more like the aristocrats were. In fact, there is a very interesting quote, which I quote in my book, A Critical Introduction to Tarot, of I believe it was a monk or a friar, certainly some kind of preacher, who denounced tarot at the time, very close to whenever it was first released. So whenever, I think whenever it became popular, and it became another deck that people were using, not just a aristocratic curiosity, denounced it as from the devil and so on, in a kind of firebrand polemic style. But it was more, it's clear that it was based on a rejection of games of chance and gambling in general. And it was just one popular way. So it would be the same thing as someone giving a sermon about why you shouldn't play poker, or something like that. And that was something that was also clear from the in the puritanical tradition. So a lot of people that went from England to America, in fact, would have just disliked games in general, because they divert people from a kind of a more pious life that it would have been their take. So in the early days, tarot was criticized more on that aspect, in terms of its diverting and association with games of chance and so on. But it is challenging, and it's always been challenging. But I would differentiate from what the folk practices are, like what do people actually do, like what do the most people actually do within a religion, and then the kind of edicts and teachings from the ostensible leaders. There's always a tension there. What if you go into someone's house, what are they actually doing versus what is the preacher saying on the pulpit?
Very true. Okay, I love that. I love that. Okay, so when somebody is picking a deck, this is the controversial part a little bit here, because you always hear them say, "Well, the deck, I have to feel the deck. It's got to like
Mm.
announce itself to me. It's got to catch my eye or anything." Isn't that just natural humanity, like picking out a pair of blue jeans at the store, or you're at the shoe store and you need a new pair of running shoes, and the you choose the Nikes over the Skechers kind of thing?
I wouldn't go that far, actually, myself, funny enough, but there is something there. Why do we feel a draw to something? I think it speaks to the kinds of compelling experiences that we have, where we feel like there's some meaning in something. So, you know, something maybe happens in your day, or I don't know, maybe you're going to cross the street and you see a cat, and then you don't cross the street and a car goes by, and you're like, whoa, that cat sort of saved me there in a way, right? But did the cat save you? You're probably, if you look at it critically, you might say, well, no, like it's just kind of happened that way. But you have a very compelling experience that something meaningful happened there, right? And I think it's the same with picking the tarot, with picking a tarot deck. That kind of like like I think that is a good way to define intuition. It's like something that you know without knowing. How do you know that? And it's no one, even the skeptics, can really like this. We can't throw that away. That's a real experience that people have. It's just on how do you interpret that experience. So the really materialist, blunt way would be, yeah, it's like picking a pair of shoes. Like, who cares? Another way would be to be a bit more curious about, like, well, what is the nature of that experience that I'm having? Like, what's going on within me? Like, how does intuition work? What is it in fact? Is it another way of knowing, or is it just something silly that sort of pushes me one way or the other that I need to ignore, basically? It's very personal. And I don't think, but there are, I'm not a psychology expert. I've read widely, but I think that there might be a more psychological answer, then there's a more spiritual answer, and so on. So it just depends on how do you think that causality works. What is consciousness? What is it connected to? All of those questions really matter. Like I would suggest in many of these deep, meaningful areas of inquiry, it matters what's behind, what's below these things.
So, is there a connection between consciousness and the cards?
I think that tarot readers would think that there is. I've definitely read that, and I think that for me, that's the way that it opens up So as you mentioned, we both discussed that tarot cards are just pieces of paper. So how can it work at all? In my book, A Critical Introduction to Tarot, I kind of look a little bit into I reason out what is a tool and how can a tool work, or how do we expect tools to work? So if tarot is a tool, what kind of tool is it? Because the example I use is a toaster. So if I want toast, I use a toaster. I put the bread in, I push down the button, toast pops out. How does it work is not really important to me, I suppose, but I probably have an idea of how it works. There's metal filaments and electricity passes through them, and then that heats up, it cooks the toast. But if I think that there are little people inside the toaster with flamethrowers that toast the toast, it doesn't change like whether or not the toast comes out toasted. It still comes out toasted. So I can have a wrong idea about how it works, and it still works. I can go further than that and say, I don't think that the toaster works. I think it doesn't work. And I put the toast in, I push it down, but the toast does come out. So I was wrong about that. So I can have the wrong idea, and the tool still works. So those are like normal physical tools. But if I think of the tarot as a tool, it's not, I don't think, going to work in the same way. In the literature on tarot, what we find, some people are willing to go as far as to say that if the person who's being read for doesn't believe in tarot, then it also doesn't work. Like I read one author who said, that they don't do readings for people unless they think that they're coming to it with a kind of open mind, and that they have some level of, trust there. And that actually the tarot reading is an exchange of trusting energy, whatever that may mean. So if it is a tool, it probably, we could say, it has to work in some way with our consciousnesses, and I think that it's the reason why in the book I also look into magical practices, because there's a relationship there between people who do practical magic. They may consider themselves witches or in a witchcraft tradition, or they may just be magical practitioners in some other way. But there's a relationship there in terms of how the belief structures are, that intention is really important. For example, chaos magic and witchcraft in general. So if tarot is a tool, I mean, it's again a long way to, which I'm fond of, as you've heard, the long way to answer the question is that if it is a tool, it's one that either tunes our consciousness or works via our consciousness, and there's some aspect of it that is based on consciousness. Obviously, that's easy to criticize because that's not formally testable. So I think you would have to open up if we're to try to support, the contention that it does work. I think that that's a reasonable way to go down it, but very difficult to test. And there has been, I'm sure you probably have people on your show, or maybe you've looked into it yourself, like parapsychological research or paranormal research. It's difficult to do, and this is certainly one of the explanations that I've come across is that because it involves our minds and a state of consciousness, that it becomes very difficult to test.
We have a couple minutes to go, actually about a minute to go here before we have to go to break. At the top of the hour, Simon Kennedy, or Kenny, is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio talking tarot. Okay, short answer here. Do you trust the cards or do you trust your brain?
Well, I don't use the cards. I'm not a practitioner. I'm interested in the cultural links and the what it says about the landscape of belief. So short answer is I don't use the cards, so it's not relevant to say that I trust them.
Well, that's an easy answer right there for you.
Yeah, I tried to be short with this one.
I appreciate that, Simon. It's been a quick first hour here. We got hour number 2 next with Simon Kenny, and we are going to be talking more tarot, intuition, consciousness. We'll run the whole gamut here when we return on the Mighty SOR, and we are having a good time tonight. And why wouldn't we? We love this show. We love bringing it to you. We love all the topics that make the woo stand up like the hair on your arms. Spaced Out Radio's hour number 2 with me, Dave Scott, in the captain's chair, returns right after this. Stay tuned. Right, we are clear. Hello, Jeremy Jones, Jessica McCreary, and Kevin Day. NHI, how are you? Put that question in for next hour. Who else has joined us? We are good. Okay, Simon, I'm just going to quickly step away. I will be right back. I'm just going to put you in the green room for a couple minutes, okay?
Thank you very much.
We got about 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Thanks.
Be right back. All right. I am back. Let's get our good friend Simon in here. All right. Duck fan, how you doing? Larky Dairy, welcome back. And I want to say a big thank you tonight to Blue Cruise, Guardian, Jennifer, Joanne, Shelley, and Radsass for the super chats. Very much appreciate the love. Don't forget, you can shop at our Spaced Out Radio store at spacedoutradio.com. We do not have ugly swag, people. We got swag that you actually want to wear out. Derek Galloway, how you doing, man? Thanks for coming on in. And who else has joined us here late? I think we're caught up. All right, guys, 3 seconds. Here we go.
You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show.
Here we go with hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio tonight. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dave Scott. Very much appreciate earning your listening ears wherever you are on that beautiful planet we call Earth. Hello to everyone listening in on our terrestrial affiliates around North America, digitally on Odyssey Radio, TalkStream Live, at KPNL. All of our archives are free. Join us at youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Deckertate. Deckertate is your password. Use it wisely, Space Travelers, as the Clam sets the password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out the swag as well. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and you can join us on Patreon in the SOR Space Travelers Club. We continue on talking tarot readings, tarot cards, consciousness, spirituality. Simon Kenny is joining us all the way from Berlin via Ireland. Thank you for joining us tonight, Simon. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right. I have 2 decks of cards on my studio desk here. And I'm curious. Maybe I'll pull one here just to see your thoughts on it. So when we go into a tarot card deck, should we concentrate on something? Do we how do we do it? Let's do a little experiment here.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Again, as we were discussing earlier on, how does it work? So most, I think maybe all tarot readers who take it seriously would suggest some kind of mental engagement with it as you do it. So as I said, intention is very important in both magical practices and tarot. So, from what I've read, usually if you have a question, then think about that. If you don't have a question, then, use meditative or even prayer methods to clear your mind or to focus up. I think that the point of that is to enter a kind of ritual space, to differentiate what you do from the everyday things in life. Tarot reading is a ritual of some kind, and as you do it more, if that's what you do, then it becomes more and more ritualized. So, I have to underline that I'm not a tarot reader, so we're doing this experimentally. So, but those are what I can say that is the usual way that people do it.
Okay, is there spirit attached to the cards, or is that just my energy since I'm the one holding them?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of answers, lots of ways to answer that. I think, Well, what is your? I mean, maybe I could flip it back. So, what is your understanding of that, or what are you willing to
My
kind of
understanding
entertain?
is it's about energy.
Okay, so go
Okay,
with
like
that.
I'll be honest with you, the cards I have in my hand, I feel I feel that I shouldn't use them.
Okay, why is that?
I I don't know. Just that I guess it feels like the answers that I am looking for or I'm going to produce are not on that deck, but on the other one.
And what is the other deck? Can you
Yeah.
show me that?
My other deck is called the Oracle of the Shapeshifters by Lucy Cavendish.
Hmm.
Just a gorgeous deck. So let's see here. Let's shake these up a little bit and see what's coming up here. All right. Shuffling away for our radio audience, since you don't know what the heck we're actually doing here. And there's a card right there. All right. And it's funny, it's a card that comes up very often for me. And it is called the Imaginary Friend. And it says
Okay.
on the bottom, childhood treasures resurface. Now, that card kind of popped out. So a lot of people will say that if a card pops out of the deck, it wants to be read. Or if it falls out of the deck onto the floor or onto your lap or whatever. But
Right. Well, first thing I'd say is that this is like a non-standard tarot deck. You know, your imaginary friend is not a typical traditional tarot card. So it would be, so this deck is obviously a kind of reimagined tarot deck of, of which there are many. It would certainly be the minority of decks. So if I was a traditional tarot reader, I would have to, either completely use my own intuition, or else have maybe spent the time with that particular deck to develop, to read into the symbols a little bit more, or to to understand it in that way. But what is it? I suppose what a tarot reader might say is, what is it? What does it mean to you? How does it speak to you?
well, I never do this, but I'm actually going to read the card's meaning. So I usually just kind of follow along with what I feel. Where's card number 15? Okay. About your imaginary friend. I'll try and do this in my best narrative possible. This fascinating, quirky, familiar asks you to pay attention to all the beautiful treasures buried in your memory, suffocating in old chests and stuffed away in drawers. It is time to rediscover something discarded. When you reclaim it and its worth, you can keep it, share it, give it away, or recreate something from it. But you must touch it, feel it, and know it again. This darling imaginary friend reminds us reminds you that childhood friends and treasures know your ancient history. Reconnecting with them can reawaken potentials you have shut down for some time. Your talents and imaginations of your younger days can be revisited and restored. Such jewels and wonders await you, and they are all in the mementos of your past. Your imaginary friend does not wish you to wallow or stagnate in the past, but to bring something that is well worth reviving in the present moment. Do this, and you will receive so many messages of shared joy and happiness. You will feel so blessed and delighted to have claimed your own very sacred everyday history.
Right, quite detailed.
Yes, there is actually more in here, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to read that. I mean, there's like a page and a half here. But nonetheless, I mean, is it something that, okay, obviously the creator of the deck, because there's thousands of decks out there, tens of thousands of decks out there. And the artist or the writer, the creator of the deck is somebody who is putting their own emphasis on what is on the card. So isn't that a bias on what we're really doing?
Yeah, I mean, we could express it in terms of a bias, but it's definitely encoded with their understanding and their values. So, in the sense of the bias of values, yeah, I would say so. There's a lot of decks out there that are for specific communities or for specific interests. Like I mentioned before, like First Nations focused decks. There's ones for people who call themselves queer, or there's ones for witches, and they would be encoded with the values of the creator. And that would be, yeah. So there, in that sense, there's a bias, and I think that especially for a tarot deck like that seems to be which it seems to be tentatively connected to the tarot. It's probably more like an oracle deck. I think it's even called that, right? It's an oracle deck, right?
Yeah.
So that's a more general category. Like the tarot format is usually sticks pretty much to the 78 cards, with 22 in the major arcana and the rest in the minor arcana, that are more like the poker deck, with the 4 suits and so on. So an oracle deck will probably just be the major arcana, which are archetypical in some sense. So the archetype in your one there is the imaginary friend, which is not something that we see in the traditional deck, but is something that is culturally archetypical. For us, I don't know, when is the first time that the idea of an imaginary friend comes into cultural consciousness. But in any case, the description there is, it's another set of received wisdom in a sense. So you may or may not be comfortable with that, or it may or may not speak to you. In terms of interpreting it, the usual way is to look at the card itself, look at the symbols and so on. In decks like the one that you have there, I think that there's less sort of symbology. One of the things that, let's say in particular, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the one that is the most popular and most widely known, this template for all modern tarot decks, has just really, really dense symbolism that, as I mentioned, it comes a lot from Christian background, but also from, medieval Hermeticism and Kabbalah, as well as astrology, kind of color theory, and then just other symbols that are widely used in the kind of Western culture. So I think you're limited maybe in how you can interpret that, and they would be of the kind of deck you have there is lighter on that's symbolic aspect. One thing I could say though is that in a usual tarot reading, like if you were to go to a tarot reader that had that deck, it would be unlikely that they'd pull just one card. Usually the way the tarot is read is as a spread, where it could be anywhere between 3 to 10, or maybe even the entire deck if you've got the time, to see how the cards come out, to lay them out, and then to interpret them according to like how you might lay them out. So let's say one card pull is what you've done there, but maybe the next most complicated one would be maybe a 3-card pull. So you could have, or a 3-card spread. So you could have, let's say, in advance, I'm going to select 3 cards. I'm going to put them down on the table, left to right. Left is going to be the past. The middle is going to be the present. The one on the right is going to be the future. And that's a predictive setting. Now, it doesn't have to be predictive, but let's just take that as an example. So you would then interpret them according to that. And then it's probably a bit easier to build that kind of narrative or story that we were talking about at the beginning of the show, about that, that tarot really suggests a kind of storytelling. And we view our own lives, of course, whenever we reflect on them, as a kind of a narrative or as a kind of a story. So by putting them out in that way, it's even more evocative, because we start to look at relationships between them. So either we use some sort of template, like past, present, future, or whatever it is, or else even just laying them out will start to suggest to you, how to interpret that in relationship to each other. It'll probably be I would suggest. A little harder to do with the deck that you have there because the meanings seem to be more definite, whereas the symbols in the Rider-Waite-Smith and other older decks, and some of the contemporary ones too, have like more of a depth of symbolism. But honestly, the symbolism is maybe less, and they're more. You mentioned biased, but we could say more opinionated or more narrowly focused on specific interests or the worldview or values of the tarot deck creator. And I think that's why there's so many, because in a way they're being reinvented to fit specific niches.
Yeah, and it has grown in popularity, where you've seen, tarot transform into oracle decks, alien decks, Bigfoot decks,
Absolutely.
Buddhist decks, and everything like that. I mean, people have really caught on to the fact that this could be a little bit of a, I don't want to say a money-making scheme, because but a little bit of a, hey, it's okay to make money. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there's a commercial aspect to it, and in the kind of culture that we're in, like the novelty is really valued, right? So, and if you are into tarot, maybe it becomes something that you do. Maybe you collect the tarot decks that you like, and the more that there are, the more choice you have, and that might be something that interests you. But I know a lot of artists as friends, and that I've spoken to in my research, and it's a really attractive project as well. Because it's a big project. If I'm going to create my more typical tarot deck, let's say, or at least to the template of it, there's 78 illustrations to do. That's a lot on a theme. So it's something I think that attracts artists as well, just purely for well, not only purely, but that aspect, is attractive, that I'm going to have to come up with a coherent way to do this. I'm going to get to do all these different flavors. And, as one tarot practitioner that I interviewed for my book, Critical Introduction to Tarot, said, that for them, the whole world is behind the 78 doors, the cards of the tarot deck. So, as a project, it's to try to encapsulate really an entire worldview or an entire system. So it's another reason, I think, why we see so many. It's not just because of a commercial aspect, although that's definitely an aspect, but it's also because it attracts artists. It's this great project to do.
Love it. Love the answer. Let's get to a couple audience questions here. All right, let's go and start with Shelley. Who exactly decided what's evil and why? So you're an older lady likes to play bingo, or you're a man playing blackjack and the lady at bingo? It was worse than the man. I mean, it sounds like a funny question, but there is a reality to that. I mean, because a lot of people are judgmental on it.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to your value system. What the example here is bingo, so that's a kind of gambling, and so that would probably come from Christian theology of why that's evil, or evil is a strong way to put it, but it's certainly that it's and I think you would find a range of answers, from evil to not beneficial and all in between. But in the American context, very Christian cultural context, then it's clear to me that's where that comes from Christian theology. We could maybe explore it a little bit deeper by saying that the prohibition on gambling is, I think, maybe twofold. It's that it is a waste of resources, in a sense that there's a kind of cultural there's a cultural aspect to it, which is encoded in the religion, which is that the it is something that, and I suppose historically as well, men engage with, and that it can ruin a family. So it's something, and I don't have to tell your listeners, I'm sure that they've been, and many people, maybe all families have been touched in some way by people who have problems with gambling and so on. So, there's that aspect of it as well. But then it's just something that's in the religious scriptures of Christianity, that there's prohibitions on, at least there's a way to interpret the scripture that there's a prohibition on gambling. And in the American context, as well as we mentioned earlier on, with the history of Puritanism, that kind of sect or the Church of Christianity, that they were in particular quite against that to an extreme sense, actually. And so I think that I'm sure American culture still has the echoes of that. But I would say, that again, in practice, there's a lot more ambivalence to that. As a folk practice, as theology is applied in practice. So in a Christian country, if there's gamblers, then there's at least a tension with that. So calling it evil may be just a way to say it very bluntly that it might be the opinion of that person. But I think that maybe goes towards an explanation there.
Awesome. Let's get to another question here. So we've got about 3 minutes before we're going to go to break here. And let's go to Paramarv. You indicate that tarot originated as a Christian mysticism. From your research, why then would so many Christians say to avoid tarot?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's because it's, so what we see in institutional religions is an orthodoxy. It's like, what is the right way to practice this religion? And it's one of the reasons why it's one of the aspects that's fallen out of favor culturally, and certainly in recent times. And that's what we mentioned earlier on, was the unbundling of belief, and what you could call that unbundling is actually a rejection of the idea or the principle of orthodoxy, that there's only one way to do it. And we need to decide the final answer on, like, can I eat pork? Can I gamble? All of these things, that there's one true answer that's true for everybody on those things. But that has historically been the case, that certainly Christianity and many, many other religions there's been like, what views win out, and then there's the struggle. So that's why we see so many different factions of Christianity. I suppose the biggest being Catholicism and Protestantism, and there's, as you mentioned earlier on, that we might have a more peaceful world if this wasn't the case, and that's absolutely true. Even just within Christianity, between Protestants and Catholics, the amount of like war, certainly in my own home country of Ireland in the north, where I'm actually originate from, my family is on all sides of that conflict, that there's been just a massive amount of violence, and it's really horrible. And that's just within Christianity. So if that can happen within Christianity, between Protestants and Catholics, and there can be bloodshed and fighting, then it kind of maybe in that context a bit easier to see why some Christians would say to avoid the Christian mysticism of tarot. They may not even recognize it as Christian mysticism, but of course that's a technique to distance yourself from a sort of cultural family member that you want to disavow, that you want to reject. So it's a minority thing. It's not it wouldn't be, it hasn't been a big thing to teach in Christianity, tarot, but the people who were interested in it followed the more mystical path. I would also add to that Christianity has an uncomfortable relationship with its own mysticism. It's something that I'm actually pursuing in my current research at the moment, is to try to look a little bit more at the kind of different Christian mystics, just to understand that a little bit better, because what I think what we have often seen in Christianity is that the theology gets pushed on by mystics, people who have visions, who have mystical experiences. Let's say the book of Revelation at the end of the Christian book of the books of the New Testament is a kind of sort of psychedelic acid trip of a kind of dream / revealed experience.
Simon, hold on right there.
Okay.
We're going to go to break. We got Simon Kenny for another 30 minutes here on Spaced Out Radio. We're being educated tonight. We will be back on the Mighty SOR right after this. Going by fast, man.
Yeah, it's a great discussion. Thanks for supporting it.
Oh, no problem. Clear that question. Let me see if I've missed any. How you doing, Zoria? Good to see you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a good show tonight.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
So what are you doing in Berlin?
I mean, why not go to Berlin? There's so much cool stuff here. But I'm here for work. I do. I'm a technologist by day. But yeah, I wanted to connect with the kind of cultural scene here, do a bit of work, and yeah, I've wanted to do it for a while. It's a wonderful city, such complicated history that you know we don't need to go into, but you know it's a really cool place, a very unique place. So I jumped at the opportunity when it came up.
I've never been to Europe.
Well, it's a good place to start if you wanna if you wanna come over. Is come to Berlin.
One day it'll happen. Eventually, I hope. That would be kind of cool.
Absolutely. What's on your bookshelf?
Oh, let's see. As far back as my Tom Clancy collection. I still got more Tom Clancy, and I'm probably about 6 books behind right now. Hi, gorgeous Larry. How you doing? And then my other books over here, right about here is where I get into my paranormal UFO stuff. And right here, I have a giant sodalite orb. That big. That's kind of cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I got a little bit of everything in here. I got gnomes. I got so much stuff from our fans that I haven't even put up yet. One of these days I will get to it. I have my ball caps here, but I got hats all over the place.
Do you play the guitar?
I did for a little bit. The cool part about it, see this sticky note right here?
Yeah.
That is actually from the day one of our listeners passed away.
Oh.
And he was living in Holland, and he chose doctor assisted.
Yeah.
Because of his health conditions, and he came by to say goodbye. And
Wow.
I said, I'm going to put this sticky note with your name on it on the guitar. And I said, I put it in between the strings, and it was straight. I said, would you stop by in the studio anytime and turn the card or turn the sticky note? And about 3 months later, all of a sudden I heard this ruffling, and we actually got it on camera. The sticky note actually moved to the diagonal.
Right. Are you convinced?
I know I didn't touch anything. I know I live in a haunted house. So it doesn't surprise me.
Okay.
Convinced, I want to believe. Okay, convinced 99.9.
Well, that's
But
a high
there's
degree.
yeah, we got about 5 seconds here, my man. Hold on, right there.
Cool.
Here we go through the halfway point of Spaced Out Radio tonight. Good to have you with us. My name is Dave Scott. Very much appreciate earning your listening ears. Reminder to all of you that if you've missed portions of this show or others, check out our free archives by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and you can join us on Patreon in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Final time tonight, we have our good friend Simon Kenny talking about tarot cards. What's behind them? Do they work? Are they worth it? We got to figure that out. Simon, thank you for joining us, my man. We really do appreciate it.
That's great to be here. Thanks.
Not a problem. We took in a couple of audience questions right before the break. I'm curious, with your mind focused on learning about the aspects of the consciousness and the spirituality side of tarot. Okay, is there a scientific side that we could look at?
Yeah, I mean, we could look at two avenues, maybe. One of them would be the sort of materialist scientific explanations that are, more along the skeptics line of questioning. Then we could look at maybe so-called alternative scientific explanations too, that do try to find a, there's a kind of movement that I'm sure you're aware of within a kind of science in general, a fringe movement maybe, but still a movement, to not or to engage with science, but in a more holistic sense. So we could look at it from both of those angles. I presume maybe the latter might be of more interest. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how you would create something scientifically out of something so vague.
Yeah. Well, so there's let's see. So one of the interesting books that I read was to do with, or one of the aspects, let's say, of modern mysticism is quantum mysticism, and that tries to marry those two things. It tries to marry the insights that have come from quantum mechanics, the theory in physics that sort of undermines the simpler Newtonian physics of, like, a ball hits another ball and it moves. If we look down at the atoms, and then go to the subatomic particles and keep going down, we eventually end up with these quantum particles that don't behave in this deterministic way. They behave in a probabilistic way, which has kind of really opened the door to some people to look at, well, what does this, does this connect to any of the ancient wisdom, or even contemporary kind of alternative wisdom that people would have? So there's people that try to argue that. So as the scientific basis is based on quantum mechanics, and it is alternative in the sense that it's because it's non-materialist. It sits uneasily within the mainstream sciences has materialist metaphysical assumptions. So it kind of just depends on where we are there. But there's plenty of people who are investigating this, who are scientists, or who are, attempting a scientific method, who who are looking at just more expansively on that. So I suppose there's a lot of open questions there, but it's not. It's an area of tension and conflict. There's arguments there. Famously, Deepak Chopra was put forward this kind of quantum mystic approach. It's been taken up by lots of others, and one of his main opponents is Richard Dawkins, and they had a kind of a relationship, if they even have a relationship, of kind of conflict. And I know that Dawkins like refused to debate Chopra, and then they kind of had a debate, and so there is a variety of belief. And Chopra is a as a medical practitioner, like I think he was a doctor, right? So he certainly was trained up in scientific, medicine is a science. So yeah, there's a variety of belief, and people try to explain. One of the interesting ways that people try to get into this is through the placebo effect as well. So the placebo effect is, if we take if we don't know that a pill maybe is inert, that it doesn't have any substance that's going to have a chemical effect in our body, but if we think that it does and we take it, there's a somewhat reliable effect that we get some of the healing properties of the thing that was supposed to be in it. So it's like, how does that work? And then the rabbit hole goes down, as it were.
Makes a lot of sense. Let's go to Simon in our chat room, who has a question for you. Have you had any high strangeness interactions to share? What got you all into this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what got me into it was trying to understand the beliefs of other people, not the beliefs that I had myself, but to try to wonder why the people who I thought were reasonable and intelligent were, believed in tarot. And I suppose that can go for any belief practice. I suppose and I have to admit, it's a naive assumption that if, that people who are smart, that are going to share your views, I suppose. So it was kind of in a project that has pretty much lifelong, is to understand belief. But in the last maybe 10 years, it's taken on this flavor of trying to be much more open-minded, and especially to use philosophical techniques to interrogate the landscape of belief and the variety that we find. That's what brought me to it. But in terms of have I had any high strangeness myself, I actually have had a surprisingly small amount of sort of mystical experience and high strangeness, but I have had some, compelling experiences like anybody else to do with dreams, especially. But in terms of, maybe seeing things in my waking life or experiencing things I haven't, I could maybe share one experience that was, yeah, okay. It was just a dream. Now it's probably lower on it's not that exciting, but I had a dream that I was at a party and I stepped outside and I was feeling a kind of disappointment, and someone told me I sat on a windowsill and an old woman was there and that I didn't know, and said and told me that a relationship that I was in was going to end. And I kind of knew that she was right. And then I looked up at the sky, and it started raining in like rainbow colors. It was really vivid. And then that did happen, that the relationship did end like a few days later. And then but the other person ended it. It was when I was younger. And what was maybe one of the most compelling parts was that it was vivid, but also because when I opened, the dream ended with me opening my eyes and being fully awake. So when you usually wake up, you kind of your eyes are sore and you kind of wake up, and there's a bit of process to waking up. Whenever she said that, and then the rain came down, I opened my eyes. I was fully awake, fully calm, and it was it was quite strange. I haven't had an experience like it. So it's nothing as amazing as seeing Sasquatch or anything like that, or even ghosts or anything like that. But it was probably one of the most interesting experiences. So, and then the question is how to interpret that. So that was almost like a prediction that then that happened. We could look at a lot of different ways. The materialist answer is hard to do, but maybe I knew it on some level and it was sort of 50-50 that it actually transpired that way. A Jungian psychological interpretation would be that I was tapping into the collective unconscious and that the knowledge was there, because in the kind of Jungian psychological framework, certainly the more mystical side of it, the collective unconscious is like a timeless space. It's not even a space, it's a timeless, who knows, it's very difficult to describe, but that all things, all kind of knowledge is there. And that's what we're tapping into. Or maybe it was, a spirit that told me that. Maybe I knew it myself, because maybe what I am isn't just Simon, some guy. Maybe I'm an expression of a greater being. Maybe we all are. There's all kinds of ways to look at that. But it was definitely something that, was that made me take notice. But I'll admit that I haven't had a lot of experiences of high strangeness. And so part of my own project is trying to understand some of those experiences of others, because of somewhat of a lack of mystical experience myself.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. As you move forward with your research, what do you hope to gain? What's the ultimate goal?
That's a really good question, and it provokes me to think, for sure. I wouldn't have like an ultimate goal apart from just to increase my understanding. I have just I think a natural inclination to try to understand. I think we all do, and this is just how I'm finding expression in it. What I really love to do is read. I'd love to read. If I was at home now, as I mentioned, I'm in Berlin, you would see just books and books and books behind me. So it's really just to understand the landscape of belief. But I suppose if I had an ultimate goal, it would be to try to come to like answers that I could have more confidence in about metaphysical questions. The nature of reality. It is. My current position is that I think that it's probably unknowable, and it's one of those mysteries. But that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile, I think, to engage with those mysteries. But on a more mundane level, I really want to just understand culture, why people do what they do. We have so many problems in the world. Maybe it's inherent that we have these problems, but I think it's pretty clear that reducing and dealing with problems requires understanding. So I want to do my part to further that understanding, and maybe try to just contribute to dispelling some of that, some of the difficulty in my own small way. For example, if someone picks up my book, A Critical Introduction to Tarot, who has a very negative view of tarot and maybe even criticizes people and creates a difficult environment for others, maybe their son or daughter, or maybe their friend or cousin or something. If they read the book and then they have a more mellow approach to it, that they understand that it's actually multifaceted, that there's good reasons why people believe in it, even if they don't themselves have to adopt those reasons, but it's really about appreciating the beliefs of others. If we could do that a little bit more, I think it's all the better.
Do you think there will be an eventual outcome of how we connect to spirit, how we connect to our higher selves through tarot?
My own opinion, and it is just my opinion, would be no, because I think that there are inherent difficulties and conflicts in people. I don't think that we're going to sort of transcend ourselves. I know that is like really the goal of so many religions and so many spiritual practices, is in some way to transcend the self or transcend the problems that we have. And I did just mention that I work towards that in my own small way, about like dealing with problems. But I do think that the problems are inherent in how we are, and that unless we do significantly change. And, you know, something interesting to look at is maybe transhumanism and intervening in how we are constructed ourselves biologically, mentally, and so on, without a significant change in our constitution, what makes us up. I think that a lot of the things that we see, although they can be managed and mitigated a lot better, which is what I would see myself contributing to, I do think that we are human, and that the human condition is comes with problems. It just comes with those things. So I wouldn't be of the kind of that transcendent belief or that we're going towards a certain direction. But then again, to argue against myself, one thing that that is curious and that does make me think and try to balance out that opinion is that, you know, maybe someone thought this 200,000 years ago, whenever humans were, or maybe 500,000 years ago, whenever humans were maybe not as we'd recognize them today. And we did change. We changed physically, gradually over time. Our brains changed very slowly, but it did change. And also in the last, I don't know what you want to say, maybe 30,000 years, 20,000 years, our culture has changed so much as to almost change us from, in that way, like the software upgrade, if you like, to the hardware that's much slower. So I think that does also challenge it. And I think that to make a long story short, what I would say is that some of that those ideas of transcendence and about like overcoming the kind of human condition in some way is perhaps based on an intuition that is how things go, that we do change. And if humans are around in 1 million years, I think we'll look very different. It's just that I think that maybe the scale of time and the scale of change that people maybe assume in maybe isn't something that I could say is convincing to me. But there's something there for sure, as there is in all these things, as you've seen throughout our discussion. There's always something, I think, to warrant further thought and to try to grapple with them deeply.
That is great. I think that's a very dedicated explanation to try and get to the findings of what we are talking about here on Spaced Out Radio. So thank you for that. You know, when we look at everything that's going on in the world and going on, you know, where life is hard right now for a lot of people. Let's be honest. I mean, people are searching for any type of answer that's going to please them. Is tarot one of those reliance that people can work with and trust, in your opinion, or is it just a cover up and a facade, you know, for quick?
I think it's probably a false choice in a way, because you could say that any religion is that. I mean, famously, and I think it's a misattributed quote, but you know, Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses. So I think there's some way to look at it where you can always see any kind of belief that's difficult to justify or requires some element of faith or the unknown or mystery as it's just a kind of salve for, you know, the human condition. So that's one way to look at it. I think you can criticize, maybe not but you can criticize any spirituality on that basis. So you can criticize tarot based on that, but anything, even including, you know, the kind of, I don't know if you'd be comfortable with the term, but the kind of weird beliefs maybe of some of the other things. So, but I think that's too easy of an answer, you know. What we do see though is people consistently trying to find answers. I think it's just something that we do. We struggle with these things in times of hardship. I think it's clear that people do go more for those kinds of bigger answers, because what we need to have is meaning, you know. So if we're suffering, especially if we're suffering a lot, it's just unthinkable that there's not some meaning to it, you know. And it's just, how do we answer that? I think that for sure one of the ways that people try to answer that is through spiritual practices like tarot. But usually tarot is within a bigger framework, either a kind of looser framework of like how they see the world or whatever. But it's not going to be on its own. It's more of like a practice like prayer or something. You wouldn't say that prayer is a complete spiritual practice. It happens within the context of something, of some other belief system. And I think that one of the things that is so evergreen or long lasting about tarot is that it seems to fit into a lot of different practices, as we mentioned earlier on, perhaps surprisingly Christian mysticism, but today it's more likely to be associated with kind of neo-paganism or, more ambivalent and loosely defined belief systems.
We've got about 3.5 minutes to go before we have to say goodnight to you, Simon. And when I look at the way people are searching for answers, they're searching for any type of healing, more so any type of hope these days. Do you believe that never mind just tarot, but any sort of spirituality can help bring comfort to those who are struggling right now? There's a lot of people hungry. There's a lot of people homeless. There's a lot of people struggling with medical conditions. People are struggling with their own anxiety and depression because of what's happening around the world. I mean, we're in a tough time right now.
Well, there's just a fact that people do find comfort in spirituality. So I think that's the blunt answer. It's just on whether or not, it comes with a lot of problems as well, but it just depends on where people are. I don't have such a big opinion about that because, I wouldn't, until recently, maybe I wouldn't have even been comfortable applying the word spiritual to myself because I had rejected that in my kind of atheism that was a hard rejection of my Christian upbringing. But, what I've seen from philosophy is that for me, the common thing is, as you mentioned, the kind of like, you put it in terms of comfort, but it's just understanding and answers. Like we will have an understanding and it's just, about that aspect. But one thing that tarot does is that it comes with, like a lot of other spiritual practices, it comes with a community. It comes with, certain things that it's not just the practice itself. It's something interesting, other people, you can meet people through it. That aspect is probably the more human aspect of spirituality in general. Like your listeners here, I'm sure, form a community themselves, and that's in some way, or not in some way, in a very clear way, beneficial to them, just like it is for any institutional religion. Not that I'm comparing your listenership to a religion, but you know what I mean, like any kind of community, sport, or anything else. But I think the difference between something like sport and a spiritual practice is that it does attempt to grapple with those bigger questions. And for me, philosophy does a lot of that as well. But it's really just about understanding, and for me, anyway, personally.
We got just over a minute to go here tonight on Spaced Out Radio with you, Simon Kenny. And I want to say a big thank you for waking up early and hanging on out with us and our audience and really opening our eyes to what is going on. If you could do me a favor, spend the next 45, 50 seconds telling everybody where they can find your books and more information.
Well, I have a book coming out. I have it here, Critical Introduction to Tarot. It's coming out in Europe on the 8th of December and in the US on the 1st of January. So it's like we've been discussing over the last 2 hours. You've gotten a taste of it. It's a critical engagement with tarot, but a good faith engagement. So that's the current project, and it's I've had a really great reaction to it. I'd love to hear what your listeners would think of it. It can be gotten on Amazon, Barnes and Noble in the US as well. And my website is simonkenny.co. That's SIMONKENNY.co. I'd love to chat about it more.
Yeah, that's great. And good luck with your book. Good
Thanks.
luck with it coming out and taking the time to join us here on Spaced Out Radio. Simon Kenny, everybody. Coming up next, Courtney Marcassani has probably one of the most important UFO reports we've ever had on Spaced Out Radio. That is next. We're going to skip ATM, go straight to Courtney right after the break. Thank you, Simon. Very much appreciated tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Really great to be on the show. We covered a lot of interesting stuff. And again, thank you for supporting such a great discussion and having me on.
Right on, my friend. You take care, okay?
Okay. All the best. Goodbye.
Good night. Or I should say good morning to him. He's in Berlin. Courtney, that's a nice scarf you have on. I'll be right back, guys. All right. Freaking pumped up for Courtney tonight. We're going to get into some serious stuff tonight. Yeah. Oh, screw it. I'm going to bring you on right now. There we go. I'm pumped for tonight, Courtney.
Me too. I just feel like I'm firing on all cylinders. Maybe a couple more than usual.
Tell me about it. Hey, I want to say a quick thank you to Rat and Shelly and Joanne and Jennifer and Guardian and Blue Cruise for the amazing super chats. Greatly appreciate the love and support. Remember, you can shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. We do not have ugly swag, people. We got nice stuff there. So make sure you go check it on out and join our Space Travelers Club for as little as $5 a month. Here we go, everyone.
Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio is underway, and we're going to make a little bit of a programming change here because the UFO report is jam-packed tonight, and Courtney Marcassani is with us, and we're going to get right to it. I don't want to miss anything here, and I want to don't want to eat up time telling you about all the stuff that I've already told you about. It's rare that I do this, but there's two big topics that we need to talk about tonight. Number one, whistleblower from the UFO world, David Grush. Well, he was on Joe Rogan for over 2.5 hours talking about everything from Pope Pius in 1933 to Lockheed Martin just recently. And I want to get right to this, Courtney, and bring you right in. So, we do have to play your theme song because that it would just be taboo if we didn't. Hold on.
Nobody's gonna know.
They're gonna know.
All right. David Grush on Joe Rogan. 2 hours and 41 minutes of absolute jaw-dropping information in some parts of it. I'm just stunned at what I heard. And Courtney, you listened to it all. You've listened to it a couple of times. How important, number one, was this conversation for Joe Rogan to have with David Grush? Rogan has tackled the UFO topic many a times, but this time it was the biggest of them all.
Well, and can I just say, I used to listen to Joe Rogan when I was getting into all my research phase because he was covering it. But, way back when, he was on the fence about it. He went from talking about it as being a very real phenomenon to going to the other side and waxing back and forth. And so it was really interesting to see how he course corrected with David Grush on his program. I thought that he was maximum impact was in the first hour and a half.
Okay, so they did one thing I liked about it was the fact that Rogan got started. There was no slow start to the show. He just went right at it about UFOs and what David Grush know. And the one thing that I liked about Grush, and if you listen to it, man, he swears a lot.
I was surprised at the F-bombs being dropped. And I was just thinking to myself, compared to your show and having to edit out my BS comment, and being like super careful, I just couldn't believe how many F-bombs were being dropped. I have to say that going forward. I know that they were being like dudes. There was definitely like a level of dude going on and guy stuff, but still, man, just throwing caution to the wind with the F-bombs.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But you know what? The one thing that I will say is, to me, it brought a real level of comfortability in that conversation where it was like two bros just having a beer talking about some major UFO incidents and occurrences. But let's get to the heart of the matter. He brought up the 1933 case in Italy, which had involved Pope Pius, had involved the Italian mob. Why was this important to you? And just like that, we have to wait for her Starlink
Is
to
that me? Okay, so
there you
that's me. Yeah,
there you
so
go.
I heard you. He was talking about the Magenta case in Italy. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, why was it important? Because it involved Pope Pius and it involved the Italian mob. Why is that important?
Because there are books written about the OSS and how the OSS got established. And what he did in that interview is make the connection between the Vatican and the Italian mob and the beginning of the CIA. And so, for people that have read about the OSS, which was the organization in the US government that was doing intelligence during the war, World War II, they established human intelligence with the Vatican. And so there's a clear connection, and he just made it public. And so there's been a lot of conspiracies about that and different types of downed crash in Italy. And David Grush is validating it and saying not only was the crash Magenta happened, there were influences like the Nazis who came to look at it, and this is the human intelligence part of it, and they were like, that's not ours. And so it's very interesting that that timeline comes where the CIA was created and that the Italian mob was also connected to it. So that was a bombshell. That was a bombshell that he said Pope Pius was back channeling with the OSS and shortly after the CIA was created. That tells you a lot about the UFO origins in the US and the secret programs.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked with that. I was shocked with the fact that, we did get into, or he did get into the idea that there was many people knowing in the United States from the creation of the CIA that this has been a real problem, because very few people uh, have really dug into this topic, including multi-star generals that he brought up, like multi-star general conversation he had where he stated that, if there was something going on, this general would know about it. And Grush literally says, with all due respect, sir, no, you wouldn't.
Well,
You
and
know,
how about him bringing up recent people in the current administration, high level officials that haven't even heard about it. That was another thing that opened my eyes to the fact of how compartmentalized it is. And it's just astonishing. It's just astonishing that those high level officials aren't read in. And the other concerning thing that he brought up was how high it really goes and who the puppet masters are. That was the other thing that I thought was a really interesting pickup, and that we rightfully predicted on this show. We talked about it, that his life was threatened and his wife's twice by some agency that he didn't know who they were. And they made it very well known that they could get to him very easily and threaten them. And so his life was threatened. And we don't know by who. So we don't know how high it goes, and we don't know who these puppet masters are. I have some thoughts, but it's scary in a sense. I mean, it's good that all of this is coming to light, because a lot of people who have been looking into these connections for so long are being validated that their work is right on and their research is correct. And so that part of it is really enlightening and very positive.
yeah, I was also shocked that, like, Joe Biden, he mentioned that Joe Biden has been read in on this numerous times with information that is vital to the secrecy of this program, and really didn't get into anything public with this. What was your thoughts?
Well, he brought up that he met with Harry Reid when he was on the UAP task force, and that he was recruited for the UAP task force to come on, and he didn't know a lot about the subject, and he had a high learning curve, and it was mostly water cooler talk. And then as soon as he gets to get clearance, right, and the security clearance at the level that he needs, he starts to go in to look at the old programs. And so he mentioned Harry Reid. Not only did he, find the ACHIP program and the money and all of that and document it, he goes to Harry Reid personally and talks to him one-on-one. And Harry Reid, he says he's sitting in his living room and he just said, yeah, it's a real program. And that he had planned to meet with Biden and talk with him about it. Harry Reid had planned this. So we know that the president knows to some degree that the program exists. He did extrapolate a little bit out of that and said he wasn't sure if that meeting happened, but he knows that other presidents have been read in. He didn't go into detail which ones, and he said that there were some that weren't. And in addition, this is one of the biggest pickups. He talked about a former president that he did read in on all this, and they did talk about disclosure. And he said that they decided not to do disclosure because of the contracts with Lockheed and others, and that the private corporations were going to be really upset and lawsuits were going to happen. And I thought that that was patently ridiculous. I think most people in the audience will feel the same way. What a ridiculous reason not to have disclosure is because of Lockheed Martin and other companies like Raytheon and Redstone. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It shouldn't be a reason to block, our possible origins of humanity.
What did you think about him talking about Harry Reid after Reid had retired before he passed, with him coming to a couple of his work cohorts, meeting with Harry Reid in Las Vegas and talking about what Reid knew about the UFO program and getting OSAP funded with the $22 million and Bigelow Aerospace getting a chunk of that as well. I mean, the one thing that I was actually pleasantly surprised to hear about that was how it all seemed to tie around all of the figures we have been watching for the last 7 years. It tied into Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon. It tied into George Knapp, which eventually tied into Jeremy Corbell. I mean, this boys club has been around for quite a while, and Grush was a part of it on the outside.
I know. And so it's once again this labyrinthian thing that even goes back to when we first opened talking about the Magenta case in Italy, which was this craft that had like this magenta plasma on the outside of it, and it turned into what was like a bell shape into an acorn, and then it crashes. And so the two pieces of this ship are broken up, supposedly, and sent in different planes to keep it safe. This is his story that he talks about with Magenta. And so what he talked about was the good old boy network back then, when Magenta had actually crashed, and how they arranged everything, kept everything secret, and then the compartmentalization started happening then, and also how the purse strings of the money came into it. And so he's making those connections that other people have made for other cases, and the conspiracy and the cabal behind it and why. And so I thought that that was really refreshing that he talked about the good old boys, running this from the beginning and who they were, and he alluded to who they were. And so anybody who's been in this for the long game recognizes a lot of the characters, a lot of the interconnections, how people got introduced into the different cases and different researches to where we are now today. And so I felt like he did a really good job breaking a lot of that down on Joe Rogan. And you could probably listen to the interview a number of times and still pick more things up out of it.
Yeah, I want to get into the whole Lockheed Martin situation, because for years we have always thought that Lockheed Martin and Lockheed Skunk Works has been one of the major players, not only in black projects from stealth programs and satellites and drones, but to holding off at I mean, it goes back, I sound a little jumpy here, but it goes back to 1992 when former head Ben Rich was recorded saying we're 80 years ahead of what the people see today, and we've already got the technology to get ET home again.
Yes, that
right?
is a famous, famous line. And you also have to look at Tom DeLonge's public and entree into the scene and saying that he was able to get into it through a Lockheed conference, right? Or a Lockheed special tech event that he was meeting up with the guy who was the public speaker for it, and that's how he got in. And so it was a Lockheed connection that got Tom DeLonge in.
Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge.
Anyway, it's similar, right? It's similar. I mean, that's how he got into the field, is by a Lockheed contact.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really the pseudo start of the To the Stars Academy.
Right.
And
And remember one of the things that he said that always stood out to me about that introduction and then him getting embedded in that community is he said that he approached it as, you guys are doing really great work. If you could share what you're doing with the public, they would think that you're amazing and that you're doing this phenomenal work. And so it's interesting tracking a lot of this back to his position and then TTSA starting.
yeah, I could see that. But I mean, getting back to Northrop Grumman, and Lockheed Skunk Works and Raytheon and all these companies that have secret facilities out at Area 51 and other secret bases where they do a lot of their test flying of potentially new craft, of drones, of hyperspeed technology, everything that goes on out there. Was this an eye opener, admitting that there is some serious technological games going on at these facilities? It may not be about aliens, but it is about, reverse engineering. It is about trying to get these craft understood.
Yeah, I mean, he goes into great detail about the facilities where these programs are. He left his career behind essentially because he felt that it was something that was illegal and immoral. And that is not an easy thing to do, to give up your career. And so he's laying everything on the line. And he's also talking about things like wet work and people being murdered in the past and the cover up and the amnesty that certain people would have. And he's talking about this from, using his words, a truth and reconciliation process with the American public and globally to release as much information as possible while also protecting people who were involved, but also prosecuting for individuals that are worth prosecuting. So it's all connected. The facilities, what they're studying, what they reverse engineered, it's all connected to, the Schumer amendment, which is coming, which is basically like everybody's A game. That's what everybody was talking about. It's what they continue to talk about. And it's concerning because in Congress, there's representatives from Lockheed, right, that are putting up opposition against certain candidates that are working for disclosure. So it's still happening. I mean, the game is on. And so we, as an American public, need to be educated and really push this through as much as we can so we can get disclosure. Even if it is a protected disclosure, it would still be some level of disclosure.
That is very true. That is very true. And the big thing with that is I think we need to also look at, the way Grush added that this reverse engineering, we have dozens of craft, dozens of pieces from intact to pieces of crash retrievals. And not all of them had bodies on them, which we will get to momentarily. But he was saying that, they even used, he believes, some sort of laser beam to, as he put it, crack open one of these craft to see what was inside.
Yeah. And how about his alluding to, and this is not a complete departure, but I definitely want to touch on it because it's part of what he's talked about. And I've been carefully looking at what he's saying, the bodies, but also the effects, ionizing, radiation and the effects when this energy comes down and affects humans, their cars, their vehicles, their person. And so he is touching on that a little bit too. Not much, but he's saying there's different ways to track everything, and he's giving people the roadmap of how it's being tracked, how the cases have been tracked in the past, and what he found in in these different compartmentalized programs, which it sounds like a lot. He found a lot.
You could see that he was really grinding his teeth on what he could and could not say. But the Lockheed Martin, when he brought that up, he actually said that he went back to get confirmation on whether or not he could mention it. And he got permission to mention that Lockheed Martin was in the UFO game. What did that mean to get that confirmation?
It's huge because it means that the vetting process allowed that information to come about. And he talked about his DOPSA review, and he talked about other intelligence officers who have come out and had to go through the DOPSA review. And they do that review process in order to check that not only that the information is factual of what's going to be discussed and the programs are accurate and their place in the programs and what their fact testimony is, but also that they're not giving away secrets, or they're not giving away, compartmentalized information in that process. So clearly going back and getting approval for the Lockheed Martin, that was vetted. He wasn't just, he's so careful. And so the fact that he went back and got it is showing us, obviously, Jim Lukatsky just wrote about being in a craft. He talked about it on George Knapp. He also went through the DOPSA process. Now we hear that Lockheed, this information was approved to come out. And so they're letting some facts come out. And it is what I would call a protected disclosure or a protected release, because the government is still in control of the narrative.
Oh, I fully agree with you when it comes to that. They are fully in control. And I think that is something that, when you're verifying crash retrievals, when you're not giving specifics. And I love this point that Grush said when Joe Rogan asked, how many craft do we have? He said dozens. Okay. Or pardon me, how many crashes sites has there been? And he said dozens. And then Grush followed up by saying, I don't want to give the specific number just in case Russia and China are listening and their spies, basically said they're going to be listening to this, and their spies, maybe they're too off. And now they're going to go pushing, let's say there's 24 crash retrievals, but the Chinese government only had record of 22 of them, that they're going to go start pushing for information again. And he didn't want to be responsible for that. And I thought that was a really keen and cool line about it, that there is UFO espionage going on around the world.
He mentioned it several times in his interview that not only are the Russians and the Chinese listening, but our own government is listening. The handlers are listening. And so he basically alluded to, and I'm sure a lot of the folks who are watching this picked up on it. He basically said there's this is my take. There's 3 countries that have competing technology and are wanting to get more advanced. And so from what I understood, or what I took from that, these power countries, right, they are getting closer to us. That's what I discerned from what he said, that they're getting closer in their technology. And so he can absolutely not talk about it because he doesn't want to hand information over to them. And so that makes sense, right? From an intelligence standpoint, that he wouldn't want to be handing over information to, foreign countries that are going to attack us with it. So we've been superior, and that's what he's saying, but he's walking a delicate balance because he's seen some things that are unsavory and are illegal, and he wants disclosure because he thinks that the American public and globally people should know what was discovered. And he talked specifically about individuals in the military industrial complex that probably know information about humanity and that they're not telling us. And so why should those individuals who are in the military and industrial complex be able to know, but not us?
And that was a huge statement. More on David Grush when we return on the UFO Report with Courtney Marcassani and the Soul Foundation. Stanford University. The UFO report continues right after this. I just want to make a couple more comments about Grush before we get into the Soul Foundation. All right.
Yeah.
God, I'm pumped up about this one.
Yeah. Well, when I got off your show last week, I basically drove to Philadelphia and then flew all night to get to the West Coast and then flew again. And so it's been a whirlwind trip, but we have a lot to touch on, things that were illuminated from the conference.
I'm not going to name names because we are live, but I was really surprised by some of the names that were invited to that conference.
Yeah.
Extremely shady UFO people who have been caught stealing, who've been caught lying, who've been caught in many Twitter wars. I was extremely surprised, and here, and I'm going to say this a little bit out of jealousy, a little bit, that here Gary knows we play an extremely clean game here, and that we have an audience and that we have radio stations, and not even an invite, not even reaching out.
Yeah, I was surprised too, Dave, to be honest. And I was in the room, and I'm not going to name names either, but I will say I was watching really closely the body languages of people that were there. And some of the people that I thought would be like the insiders, with the group of power players that are there, like Chris Mellon and, and Gary Nolan and others, I figured that they would be glad handing, and they weren't. And so I think that there is definitely some at arm's length kind of things going on that people aren't seeing that I did see being there. And so I think some of that was because of the public pressure or public image and the things that people, the popularity that they have in the community. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they've done the right things. They've done the right things or walked the right walk.
There was a lot of look. For the people listening on YouTube right now in the podcast side, there's a lot of scumbaggery that happens behind the scenes that never gets to the public in a lot of private chats. Courtney, you're involved with a few of those. I'm involved with a few of those.
I've been skewered. I've been thrown under the bus a couple times, and I'm just always fascinated, but also hurt by it. It does hurt. Yeah. It's a painful process when you get skewered.
Yeah. And when I saw a number of people, including one who got caught taking pictures, who was not supposed to be taking pictures, who literally has his resume, if you read the first line, it lies right through to the end. There were so many people there that I just shook my head. I just shook my head. Like people who've been involved in ufology for 8-9 months getting the invites. We've been doing this for 9 years, and I know other people a lot more with a hell of a lot more credibility being there, not even getting invites at all, and they have incredible reputations as well.
I know it was disappointing that there was only 200 invites, but I guess 300 people were there in the room, and I was astonished by the fact that there were a lot of people there that didn't know anything, didn't know the history, didn't know about cases, didn't know about experience or after effects. I mean, just didn't have much in the way of knowledge around the topic. And so that was another thing that was confounding to me. I didn't understand. And so then I started to think about what their charter is, at the Soul Foundation. And I think a lot of it is to introduce new people into the field, to get them, into projects and other things.
I really, really respect Gary Nolan.
Yeah.
I have a ton of deep respect for him, not only as a scientist, but as an experiencer as well. And you know what? Maybe it's an email. just to say, Gary, there's a lot of good people who would love to have gone to this. I know you couldn't supply tickets for or invites for everybody, but next year maybe take a closer look at who's being invited and who's not, you know?
Well, I didn't know you weren't allowed to take pictures. So I'm immediately like taking pictures, in the
Yeah.
foyer and whatnot. And, and then all of a sudden we get in there and it's like no pictures at all. And I was like, oh my God, like major faux pas. I'm not going to get invited back. But once I knew what the rules were, I didn't do it.
Hold on one sec, Courtney. Here we go with the final half hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. We are continuing on with a very important UFO report after David Grush spilled his UFO guts out on Joe Rogan Experience earlier on, and this is probably going to be one of Joe Rogan's biggest, if not the biggest show he has ever done on the UFO topic, and maybe overall as well. Courtney Marcassani, welcome back. One thing I wanted to get into was the fact that I thought Rogan did very well in approaching David Grush about his health and his PTSD, and Grush going into the stories of his two friends, deciding that life wasn't worth it, and one right before his wedding, one after he served as best man at his friend's wedding, like 30 days later or something along those lines. And I just felt that really cleared the air. And where I noticed that was I went on Twitter after that, and one of Grush's harshest critics has been John Greenwald from the Black Vault.
Oh, yeah.
And John, when that story came out about Grush's PTSD and his record of being arrested by police and everything, John actually, I thought, manned up a little bit and kind of brought the brakes up, pulled the reins in and said, look, this is what a lot of veterans are going through. And, we can debate the UFO subject all we want, but there's reality of a human being who's seen some tough times. And I wouldn't be remiss in saying, that was an emotional moment during the show for me. How about you?
Oh, I thought his candor. He was very forthright. He was very vulnerable, but also meanwhile protecting his emotions. I thought that Joe Rogan approached it very carefully, and maybe he's taking a page out of Chris Cuomo's book with Ross when they talked about it as a follow-up to the Whistleblower Protection Act, and that his medical records were going to be leaked by The Intercept, and they jumped on that and talked about how ugly it is, to be disparaging of a veteran who's dealing with PTSD. So I thought they did a very good job being factual about it, not dwelling on it. But the other thing that he brought about that I thought was really interesting in this discussion was about how the intelligence community and his network specifically have been intimidated, harassed, gone through traumatic experiences, been threatened, and how that creates trauma and how it brings the PTSD up because of what they're enduring in these compartmentalized programs, and that they can't get anything pushed forward like they want to. That's an additional secondary trauma that I thought was interesting that he introduced, that people probably aren't considering at all, what he's going through or what his network is going through, and trying to get the compartmentalized programs out and bring that truth to the light. So I thought that was an additional piece that he hadn't talked about before, that he was trying to raise awareness about what his people and his network have been through. Did you pick up on that?
I totally picked up on that. And, I think he was very shocked, and I was shocked as well by how much trouble they are having, from people not believing within the government to those being covered up to those being, trying to play the end game of this topic right in front of them. And like you said earlier, the threats that him and his wife had from people within the government and government agencies. And, him tying it in that every government agency right now is involved, whether it's the CIA or the NRO or the NSA or the military branches, each individually and then collectively. We're dealing with something I think a lot more dangerous on a human side than an alien side.
It's insidious. It's an insidious disease almost, and that there are unscrupulous players in the game willing to do. I mean, who was it that said, I can't remember if it was Richard Doty who said this. I think it was, where he said that there was so much money spent on counterintelligence, right? And disinformation, kind of hiding and protecting, what was really behind a lot of these walls. It was almost as much as what was being spent on the actual back engineering. And so if you think about that with the taxpayer money and the people that had been involved, even the 3 people that got the $22 million, Inouye, Stevens from Alaska, and Harry Reid, right? They were all part of the Gang of 8. All 3 of those people were part of the Gang of 8. So they were a very powerful group to get the money allocated for Bass, but they also probably had an inkling of why they wanted to look into that. And it wasn't just, a skeptical glance. They knew. And so it's interesting because when you hear him talking about going to interview Harry Reid at this late stage, even in Harry Reid's life, still not being able to get the information out, even to the president, it's mind-boggling how insidious it is and how deep it goes and who's really, I'm just fascinated with who's holding the damn puppet master. Who's holding the purse strings on all this? Who's running it? People have got to be asking themselves, how powerful are these people and what will they do? And what cost? Human cost.
And for what people need to understand is this goes way beyond Arrow. Yeah. Arrow has nothing to do with this. I was once told by Science Bob that there is a college of they call it the college or something along those lines, where there are 4 people who are pulling the strings on this topic, and they've been pulling the strings for a long time. And I think Grush's started to expose that this has nothing to do with the military. The military is protecting it as they are supposed to, but they are not pushing the buttons on saying who is actually controlling it. And I think if that comes out, that could break out a whole lot of hell breaking loose on the UFO story.
It's never going to come out. It's never going to come out. There's no way that those individuals will ever let their belly be exposed. There's just no way. One of the things that Hal Puthoff said that was my big takeaway from the symposium was that he was invited, as well as other stakeholders, people who worked in compartmentalized programs, were invited to a meeting as far back as 2008 to talk about disclosure and a controlled disclosure. And they were given surveys. All these stakeholders who had been in compartmentalized programs were given surveys where they were like, these different topics in disclosure, and they were rating them on a rating scale from +9 to -9. So each of these individuals were given the survey, the special topic, and how would disclosure influence these topics, positive or negative. So Hal Puthoff says, this is just so crazy. He says he was surprised that all the surveys were overwhelmingly negative against disclosure because of the interests involved. And then he rounded out his topic by saying, this discussion, that one of the reasons why full disclosure will never happen is because the IRAD monies, the research and development monies that go to private contractors, most likely illegally. And so this is something that was being discussed in 2008, and the reason why disclosure never happened, and the reason why full disclosure will never happen. And so some people might feel really disheartened by that, because I've been talking with people all day long about this and the symposium and the information that came out, but you have to look at the fact that we're here now, and we've never been here now before. So we can push for a lot more when it comes to disclosure. We have the Schumer Amendment. We have real concrete things that we can push through with grassroots and public pressure. So I'm positive about that.
Okay, let's quickly switch over to the Soul Foundation, put together by Gary Nolan from Stanford University. It was an invite only conference. You were one of the few who got invited to this. And what was that like? Tell us about it.
I'm an outsider. I'm not on the inside. I'm definitely an outsider, and I'm more of a like socio cultural person who perceives a lot of this from that perspective.
And we'll just wait for her Starlink to kick back in before we kind of get to that. But this was a conference that was held this past weekend in Stanford University at in California, I believe in San Francisco. And you know what? It was a conference that really pushed the limits on what was going on. The Soul Foundation had major speakers like Jacques Vallée and Avi Loeb from Harvard speaking in on the subject. It's something that was very, very keen for a lot of people. And we were not invited. I'm okay with that, even though selfishly I would have liked to have been there. But it's a conference that had 200 people and invites. There was about 300 there, according to Courtney. And you know what? It's one of those conferences that probably will continue as a new group kind of opens up towards the story of ufology, the story of what we need to get there and get that story going. She's just rebooting right now. So we will get her back on here in a minute or two. But I mean, some of the stories that were coming out there, I know I talked to Tim Senor, who had a number of people that he knew there who were pretty much saying that this is another Enigma Labs or Avi Loeb's group that he has trying to put together and take over the UFO story. Others were saying the information was absolutely incredible. That this goes beyond just nuts and bolts. It goes beyond the consciousness level and what people know and how we need to bring the community together. There's Courtney. Courtney, one of the things that I was just saying, I'm not sure if you heard it or not, was, I've heard from people that the Soul Foundation, it was incredible. The information was there, was jam packed. And I heard from other people too that kind of had a little bit of a differing idea that it was like, oh, are we dealing with another Enigma Labs here? With how they're going to set up and try and, use portals and computers and AI and everything to try and bring uh, the attention to themselves as another foundation. I mean, what was your thoughts on this?
Well, you were listening closely with what David Grush is saying. It's a think tank. They want to set up a think tank. So that means a think tank that goes into policy, that also goes into research and development, that also probably does white papers and also does academic stuff. So I think it'll differ from Enigma, and that it's not just a money grab, right, to get the technology and develop the technology for a private interest, which we've seen this, right? This is a huge part of the reason why the programs aren't public. So I think that the think tank will be somewhat of a departure from what Enigma does. And I also think they'll be more open. I think they'll be more open in terms of what they're doing, because Enigma, there's a lot of secrecy within that organization. So I think it'll be different.
Well, I hope so. I just worry about anything, you know, I've never talked with Avi Loeb. He's been on Spaced Out Radio before on the weekends. I've never talked with him. He seems very pleasant. He seems very opportunistic about wanting to talk about this subject, but on the flip side, I get concerned when I see the same people's names in 4, 5, 6, 7 different groups. It makes me wonder what the end game and the end goal is for them. Is it really about trying to bring the answers out, or is it about, trying to be the man or the woman in that situation where your name is tied to the story, and that becomes more important.
Well, you have to think back to when Obama came into our atmosphere and into our orbit. And he at first came out and said, no, this is not a big event. Then he changed his mind and he came back out and said, yes, this came from outside. And so he has also done a reversal. And also in his Galileo project, bringing Gary Nolan in, I thought that was a smart move. He's brought other people in. And I think that he is genuinely trying to understand it and do education about it. I think it's interesting that he changed his mind publicly.
Yeah.
That says something about his character and his thought process. And he did say at the Soul Foundation, why is childlike bullying more powerful than childlike curiosity? That's one of the things that he said. And so he's trying to do education about the fact that UAP and UFOs have been seen and they exist. And I just think that he wants to be taken seriously now as one of the scientists in the field, especially in academia, to write papers and things about it. So I see him and view him in a somewhat positive light as somebody who's changed his mind, and I respect that.
I haven't seen that yet, but I will definitely take your word for it.
Well, you have to go back and look at some of the things he said in the media when this happened, and he came out as a Harvard, scholar, negating that it was significant, and then he came back out and said it was significant, and that's when he started Galileo. So he had a change of heart. I don't know why, but you have to look at those movements and see the way people move.
5 minutes to go before we have to say goodnight on the show tonight. What's your top 2 takes out of the Soul Foundation conference?
I thought that it was the biggest takeaway was Hal Puthoff saying that he was in that stakeholder meeting and that we'll never have a full disclosure. The second part of it that I didn't mention that he said was that the government came back after that survey and said, well, we're never going to have a disclosure unless we can control the narrative. And that's why all the NDAs were started, so that they could shut everybody down, so they couldn't talk about their programs or do any fact testimony. And so that was the big part of it that I thought, well, this is really interesting that they had this game long ago and he was part of it. And he went on the record saying that it's because of the contractors and it's because of the illegality of the IRAD monies, which Grush testified to at the hearing. That was one of my big pickups. We talked about it on your panel as a group about the IRAD monies and how important they are and the notification system and the tracking. And so my big takeaway is we need to change that. We need to change the notification systems for the IRAD monies, and they're working on it. And so I hope to get involved with that part of it to make the change, because that's a big barrier to us finding out what's going on. The second part is that they don't know what it is. They don't know what NHI is. They don't have a clear understanding. So people might think that they do, but I'm not sure that they do. I think they have ideas about it, and I think that they have some evidence. But I think that NHI might be a big part of this disclosure, because I think NHI is going to come out and push it. That was my other takeaway.
Well, you know what, though? I mean, we've been saying for so long, where are the aliens? When do the aliens come into play on this story?
Didn't you think it was interesting that Grush said, not the aliens or us, but that he said it was his personal perspective that there was an engineering program?
Would that equal out to a MyLab?
So it'd be another reason why disclosure would never happen, because the government cannot admit that they were involved in any of that human experimentation. They just won't. I mean, they've done it before, but they're certainly not going to do it in our lifetime.
Well, once again, I'm going to pat our backs here at Spaced Out Radio because of what you said here. Okay. Once again, we've been telling the audience for 2 years, we are not in a disclosure movement. We are in a confirmation of the phenomena movement. Disclosure, like you just said with Hal Puthoff and other people at the Soul Foundation, any controlled narrative is not disclosure. It's controlled, it is contrived, and they're only going to put out what they want us to hear and for what they want us to know.
And so we have to ask ourselves, why would they want us to know that Jim Lukatsky was in a craft? I mean, we have to start asking ourselves different questions. Instead of demanding disclosure, we have to start looking at what's coming out and asking ourselves, why? Why is this part of it?
That's why I love working with you, is because you're much like me. Everybody else is looking at the big sentences, okay, and the run-on paragraphs. You're looking for those little key words like Lukatsky in a craft, and you're reading between the lines and saying, that's what we need to know. That's the direction that we need to head.
Yeah, and Hal Puthoff called him. Hal Puthoff said he called Lukatsky afterwards after he read the book and saw that paragraph and was like, what happened? What's the program? And Lukatsky said, I can't tell you anymore. I can't even step my toe over the line. So Hal Puthoff calls Colin Kelleher and says, hey, what do you know about Jim Lukatsky being in the ship? And he's like, I don't know anything. He couldn't tell me anything. And so we have to look at how at their level, and they've been involved with SAPs, they don't even know. So you got to go a step or two above it and look at the way this is trickling down. And we're the ones that have to put the dots together. We do. They're not going to tell us. So we can do it because stuff is coming out and there's pressure. So we just have to look at the pressure points and see what's being leaked.
Do they really not know, or do they just not want to tell us?
Well, it's both. Yeah, we know that because, in some of the interviews that have come out about that Skinwalker book, there's things that they just can't talk about because they were involved in it. So they know one part of it, but they don't know everything. They only know because it's been so separated. You got specialists working on special projects and special things and special parts of the technology, but they don't know everything. And so, I like the way Grush is likening it to the Manhattan Project, because you had these astrophysicists, you see, on one part of the technology or one problem, and then you had engineers working on other parts and communications. I mean, everything has been so separated, and it's not a great way to do it, but it's the way they've been doing it. And so helping us know how they've been doing it will help us know who's legit and what they know and what they don't know. You can tell.
Courtney Marcassani here on Spaced Out Radio, wrapping up an intense UFO report. As we got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Special thanks to everybody listening in at work, at home, in your cars, wherever you may be. Thank you to everyone in our chat rooms tonight. YouTube, Twitch, LGAB, Facebook, Spreaker, LinkedIn, the Space Travelers Club, and on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. I know you're out there somewhere. Remember, this show is copyright by Spaced Out Radio and SOR Media Ventures Limited. Thank you so much for choosing to share your evening with us. Because together, my friends, we're watching. We own the night. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Yes, the Woo train has docked for the night. But soon, my friends, we shall ride again. Your seats are always available. Your tickets never expire. And if you want to bring a friend, we've got room for them too. Good night.
Yeehaw.
So what else about Soul can you tell us?
Well, I think it was interesting. Whitley Strieber was there. I talked to him in the hallway before I left the first night. I found myself out in the hallway with him, and I went up to him and I said, I just have to ask you this before I go. I said, do you feel somewhat disheartened? Because he asked a question, and it was very much a similar question to when I was at the Archives of the Impossible. Very, very same, along similar lines, because he was frustrated. He was frustrated in the audience listening to this, all these, lectures and presentations. And as an experiencer, he's talking about it like, what are you doing to address the experiencer issues, essentially. I mean, that's the nature of it. And I said, are you disheartened? Because I kind of feel like we're, pretty much back in Houston and maybe even a couple steps back. And he said, yes, I am disheartened, because it feels like they don't have a structure, any kind of infrastructure, how to answer these questions for experiencers. So he and I were kind of feeling the same way, like a little let down. But then he did say he was feeling more positive about the fact that these questions are being raised from a cultural standpoint and that they are going to work on it. So I left feeling okay about his take. But, there was DIA, I think there was every number of alphabet agency there, and they didn't identify themselves, but I know they were there. And I thought it was interesting that I had to change my mind about some things in the intelligence community, about what they're up against and what they're facing, like what I talked about in the interview. I usually don't feel bad for those guys, but, I ended up questioning my feelings, and the conflictual feelings that I have about that, because there are some good guys in the intelligence community. That's another thing that I walked away with. I had some great conversations with individuals who are coming into the field doing new work. And one guy that I met out of South Dakota, very cool guy, both his parents were in NASA. And so we talked about their work, and that was very fun. I mean, there was a lot of mingling with new people, and there was also a lot of friends and people from the past that were there. So it was nice to see everybody and have those connections. But I didn't feel like there was a lot of new. I didn't feel like there was a lot of new information. I mean, in fairness, for the people that are new coming in, they had a lot to learn. But, individuals like us who are doing all that research and in the groups and studying cases and the history and the politics, I didn't really feel like I gained anything in terms of new information. What it told me is how they're going to move, how Soul Foundation is going to move forward with the people that were there, the stakeholders, their own type of stakeholders, and getting money. It'll be about funding projects. So
Yeah.
I also feel a bit ambivalent and conflicted about that, of course, who's going to get the money and who's going to do the research and that kind of thing.
Was just going to say that.
Yeah, well, I think David Grush listens to you. Didn't you feel like he answered a lot of the things that we've been putting out there in these news reports? Because for some reason, I feel like he answered a lot of it and went into great detail. I felt like, oh my God, he's answering all of our questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If he listens, great. Hey, how you doing?
Well, I just wanted to drop that because I really felt like some of the things we've talked about came up, and maybe that's just, public information, but it seemed very specific.
I thought, you know what? I'll be honest with you. I never thought about it that way, but now that you bring it up, maybe Rogan's team was listening and knew what to ask.
Oh, yeah. Those guys, I mean, when he was talking and then he was just like, oh, go get that video about Jackie Gleason or whatever. I was like, oh my God, he's got a team of lackeys that go and hunt stuff down for him. So, they listen to a bunch of different programs and get up to step and get up to speed. And so we've been on the cutting edge of most of it from the beginning since I was at the hearing, and we've been having these talks. So I think that it's very good. So we should just keep going, keep bringing up the issues and putting it out there, and maybe it'll get answered.
I think what we need to do is we need to create a Sunday show just for us called the SOR's UFO Hotspot. Just a 1 hour show.
That'll be great.
And I think, and if we want to bring on a guest panelist, we could do that, not to interview, but just to go over and what we'll maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects of this. I mean, the psychic stuff, right? All the psychic programs and the out-of-body stuff. I mean, there's so much. There's so much to talk about. So much.
Oh, I hear you, dude.
Well, that's kind of one of my interest areas. If it has anything to do with SRI or the psychic programs, I'm
going to tell you, when you were back in Alaska, okay, and hold on 1 second here. I forgot what number I'm on. When you're back in Alaska, You have to come down to British Columbia, and I'm going to introduce you to Samantha Mowat.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I would enjoy that. I've been,
And-
I've been to Canada, and I have to tell you, I've traveled around there, and a lot of the Canadians just want to talk about UFOs. I was at a
Yeah.
biker bar outside of like Edmonton, and all these bikers in there, and I was somewhat afraid, right? But the one guy was like, "So what do you know about UFOs?" And I was like, "You want to talk about UFOs?" And the whole bar lit up, and all these bikers were talking about all these UFOs up in Edmonton. And so I've actually met some really cool people in Canada. They're very open about it.
I will tell you this. I had one person close to Lou Elizondo investigate Samantha for a potential television show that I was called upon. Not for me, but if I knew a intuitive female for that. And the show never got off the ground. But after this person investigated Samantha, he literally said, "We can't bring her on. She knows too much."
Yeah, well, I think that's a lot of reason why they don't want us around. To be honest, this is just
Yeah.
my own personal opinion. I think one of the reasons why they don't want us around is because we're so perceptive, for one. I mean, you saw that in our group, how perceptive some of us are, that we're just seconds and minutes and, ahead, and everything kind of coalesces. And you see these psychics just totally psychically tuning in. So I think that's a lot of reason why they don't
Yeah.
want to have psychics around, because they perceive stuff and you can't hide it.
Ange, for you, I'm going to get Samantha on in December for year end. And you know what, Courtney, you should join me that night.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I would love to. I've been wanting to meet her for a long time.
I will tell you this from personal experience, and I'm not saying this to be cocky or vague, but from personal experience, if you ever walk into a forest with her, you will see them.
Yeah,
They will
well,
come out to play.
I know that about certain experiencers, that they come down for them. That's why they track certain people, because they know that they have the connection. And so they know they appear consistently. It's definitely a thing. So I absolutely believe that. So
Oh yeah.
it'll be nice to make the connection, because when you connect with another experiencer, some kind of synergistic catalytic thing happens. It's pretty phenomenal.
When Samantha and I are together, let's just say between her and I feeding off each other,
Yeah.
shit hits the fan.
Yeah, I have no doubt. You throw a Lou Elizondo in there and it's like powder keg,
Actually, no, I can't say that on the air.
That's okay. That's okay. We've established the connection, and I'm sure it will happen. And I will be traveling up north to Alaska, so I might be able to stop by.
Yeah. Well, I would actually like to plan that for a weekend in 2024, because there are certain people who've already told me they would like to experience that. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think if we had you, me, Samantha, Merle, no cameras, nothing on film. Okay, just let's just have it done. And one or two other people, I believe that there would be a giant wow factor eventually leaked onto the internet.
Yeah, well, we've got to continue to do the field studies, right? And do the field work, and not let the negative narrative come in and influence that kind of thing. So, yeah, you have to have the positive, you have to have the high level consciousness. And if you put a couple intuitives in there, it's going to be fabulous. So
you got that right.
Yeah.
You got that right. Well, I'm going to let you get to bed, but because I got to shut down the show here and download everything for the radio stations. But Courtney, I'm going to call you on my phone here in just a couple minutes.
Okay. Sounds good.
I want to go over about this new potential show we might do on the channel. But we'll talk to you in 2 nights time for another UFO report. And I'm sure there'll be more coming out of the Rogan interview and everything like that.
There's so much coming. There's so much coming. It's, you got to stay right on top of it.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Audience, I want to say a big thank you tonight to Ratsaz, Shelley, Joanne, Jennifer, Guardian, and Blue Cruise for the super chats. And tomorrow night on the show, I'm actually going to have guests in studio. My good friends, Phil and Pauline Byrne, who moved up to my area from near Vancouver, and they helped me with the ghost tour this week or this year. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about their love of ghost hunting. And I'm sure you're going to love Phil and Pauline. And by the way, you know how, if you notice, I'm getting better? Phil is the guy who's been working on me and my body and getting my body back in tune. So I'm excited to introduce all of you to them. It's going to be a great show tomorrow night. Paranormal, ghosts, and everything. And we will see you all tomorrow. But thank you. And guys, 24 hours away, guys. You better start your plan to get to Walmart, Target, Best Buy. Okay? Find your path. Okay? Bring some weapons. Tape the knuckles. Because Black Friday is just about here. And by God, turn your camera on horizontal and not vertical. Use a GoPro. Put a GoPro on your head or on your chest. Okay? We got to rock and roll here, people. Okay? Black Friday comes once a year, and we need to beat the living shit out of some people. Come on, America. You can do it for us. I have faith. See you tomorrow night, everybody.
Stay healthy, my friend.
You too.
You need bail money, give me a call.
Always, Dad. Take care.
You too.